Good afternoon, everyone. Welcome to the Committee of the Whole meeting of Tuesday, September 1st. Just a reminder that no final decisions will be made here today. These will just be recommendations to Council going forward to this regular September 15th Council meeting. So we'll call the meeting to order. I'll ask for a motion for the adoption of the agenda, please. Councillors Elmsley and Yeo. All in favor? That's passed. Is there any disclosure of pecuniary interest in anything on today's agenda? Seeing none, we'll move right into deputations. Our first deputation, which is more of a presentation, is item 4.1, an overview of the 2020 budget companion document for Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. Mike Walters is joining us on Zoom, Chief Administration Officer, Lake Simcoe Region Conservation Authority. I'll wait for... Hello, Mike, how are you?
Very well, thank you very much.
Good, you can hear me, we can hear you, so go ahead, sir.
Okay, thank you, Your Worship, Deputy Mayor, members of Council, staff, and anybody listening at home. Thank you very much for giving me the time today. I would like to draw Council's attention to our budget companion document for 2020. It's a new format. This is the second year that we've used this format. It worked very successfully last year. It essentially is a status of what we're doing in 2020. It shows the budget. It doesn't go into as much detail with respect to the actual line-by-line items that the budget document does itself. It's more of a what are we going to do with the resources that the municipality has provided. And because it's in step with our strategic plan, I'd like to just give a very brief overview of our annual operating priorities for 2020 and where we're at with them. So just to give Council a status of what's been done to date. So next slide, please. So as I mentioned, the companion docket isn't the budget itself. It does contain the budget, but if you really are an accountant and you want to go through the detail line by line, you want to just look at the budget document. This is more about how we're going to spend your money, and it does talk to some of the work that has been done in the past. Next slide, please. We hope that it's easy to read and it's open and transparent. The services that the authority provides are there for folks to see. Hopefully it's, as I said, easy to navigate, but the real thing is it's very transparent. Moving forward. And this was something I think that the province of Ontario had communicated to us through some of the consultation is they wanted to see exactly how we were spending our money, especially their money. Not that we receive a lot of provincial dollars, but where is the resources going? What is the return on investment associated with those resources that we're getting from our municipal partners? Next slide, please. So if you look at the budget document itself, there's a general summary at the start. It talks about our 7 program, our service areas. It gives you an overview of the total budget, which is just shy of a little more than $21 million. It shows where we're getting our revenue from, and it also shows the expenditures, where we're spending the money within those service areas within the authority. Because it's linked to our strategic plan, obviously it has our mission and our vision as well. Next slide, please. This document is meant to sort of narrow down right to the program level with respect to how we're spending the resources and what is being achieved. So I've used this is one of our service areas, water risk management. We discuss each of the service areas in detail. The number of full-time equivalents that work on the different programs. Each of the program areas within water risk management are identified. So it gives you a very quick and easy breakdown of where the resources are going. And I'm proud to say you can see that the biggest portion of this is going towards restoration. And these are projects either to do projects that reduce flooding, flood relief projects, or projects that improve water quality and reduce runoff across the watershed. So you can see right away the operating, the capital, where the revenue is coming from, and where it's being spent within each of the program areas. Next slide, please. And this is one specific program within the authority, the Flood Management and Warning Program. Again, we talk about what the specific goals and objectives of each are. We also provide a bit of an overview of what the opportunities are for 2020. What are we doing with your resources? As well as we are providing a bit of an overview. Here are some of the achievements from 2019. We're hoping that this document will replace our annual report. We don't want to duplicate and produce a lot of paper. Our annual report that we produce once a year is great, but because it's once a year, the council will only get to see it on occasion. We're moving towards a sort of a dashboard with respect to all of our programs and services. And that dashboard and this report will hopefully replace the annual report. The dashboard will give you real-time updates on what is happening, what progress is being made within the watershed. So how many trees have been planted, how many acres of wetland have we created, how many permits have been issued, and so on and so on. So those key performance indicators are going to be part of the dashboard. They'll be updated throughout the year so that by the year end, you'll have a great picture of what we've done and you'll see how we're doing throughout the year. This document will come out, it'll have the main achievements, but more importantly, it will discuss what we're going to be doing with your resources for that given year. Next slide, please. So I mentioned that this is very much linked to our strategic plan, and every year we go through a process where we actually develop our work plans, then assign resources to meet the strategic objectives. And the key ones, which are strategic activities, we call annual operating priorities. And essentially, there are some annual operating priorities that might not be in the strategic plan because of opportunities that present themselves throughout the year. If, for example, if we got some federal funding for a program, we would obviously want to jump on that. Or is there a stressor or some impact, some issue that's come up, which has resulted in us reallocating resources and doing something? So that's really important. They're not always the strategic activities. But mostly they are. And some of these actually span more than 1 year because we have significant budget implications for some of the activities, some of the programs and services. Climate change would be an example of that. And I'll speak more to that in the next slide. Next slide, please. So these are the proposed activities for 2020. They've been reviewed and presented to our board of directors. Staff have been working on them. I just wanted to give you a brief update of where we're at with respect to some of these activities. First of all, floodplain management and mapping, and something that's relatively new for us is the flood relief program. So we've updated our floodplain emergency mapping. We have got some new mapping in from the province and the regions in partnership with both. It's called LIDAR. It provides us very good resolution on the ground. So we've been able to update a lot of our flood maps. And what that's done is it's also identified opportunities where we can undertake projects to reduce flooding and take people out of harm's way. And this is important. So two such programs, there's a project happening right now in Uxbridge where they're opening up conveyance in the downtown core, which is removing a lot of the floodplain and taking a lot of houses out of harm's way. And we're just in the process of proposing a new project. We did the EA, we're trying to get some funding to get it in the ground. It's a creation of a wetland over in Innisfil, the Alcona wetland. And it would reduce flooding to the village of Alcona, especially low-lying areas that are chronically flooded annually. So that's new for 2020, and it will continue on as part of an authority program well into the future. So that's good news, I think. Climate change, both the adaptation and mitigation strategies are completed. The reports are online. We're just operationalizing both, and some of our municipal partners have already been contacted. We're going to be doing some pilot projects with a few of the southern municipalities that have the biggest carbon footprints under the mitigation, but all of our municipalities will be involved in adaptation. And that includes things like the tree planting program, which also benefits our natural heritage management strategy, which is to grow our forests, create more wetland and grassland. So those two are completed, and we're just in the process of operationalizing them. Those are the kind of programs that you would see key performance indicators created for, and you would see on the dashboard as we move forward to show the progress that's being made. Our asset management plan has been delayed a bit due to COVID, but it will be completed probably second quarter of next year. So this is one of our casualties of COVID-19. We didn't get all the work done we needed before a lot of the staff had to start working from home. And so some of the evaluations of some of the facilities has lagged, but we're well underway to get this completed second quarter of next year. So enhancing service delivery for plan review and regulation. Again, this was a COVID issue, but it actually worked in reverse. COVID has caused us to innovate and do a lot of different things. And electronic submissions for applications for both plan review and permits is one of them. And as a result, I'm proud to say we've been able to hit the compliance numbers for the province with respect to timelines for permits. We've only had 3 out of more than 400 now that have gone beyond the timeline. And that was because they were complex permits and we didn't have all the information provided by the client. So plan review has been going exceedingly well, and the industry's really working with us. And I'm very proud of the relationship we have with the build industry. They've done a phenomenal job, and essentially we're doing the same work that we did before, probably even better with respect to the timelines. So we're always trying to improve our service delivery in this area, so it will continue on. But we're pleased with some of the changes that have been made to date, and again, the numbers speak for themselves. So our next one is Scaling Creek Operations Center. It is completed. Thank you very much for your contribution in the past. So the new center is we just took the keys back from the contractor last week. We still don't have all of the occupancy permits, but that will be coming very shortly as we're just going through the final strokes with the municipality. So unfortunately, we won't be moving back into the office for a little while yet as we deal with COVID-19 and social distancing. So, but stay tuned. We'll keep you updated when the opening actually occurs. So we're still continuing to fundraise for the education center, the new nature center. COVID has really emphasized the need that we need these centers more than ever. People really wanted to get out into nature, and our facilities at Scanlon Creek were somewhat old, past their life cycle. We were only dealing with classroom sizes of around 60. The new facility will allow for classrooms of up to 250, which is what our clients, the school boards, are looking for. As well, this is being done through fundraising. So we've already raised over $1.4 million for the center. There are applications out for another $5.5 million. The total cost of this facility would be around $6 million, including all costs. That's everything in the ground. And we were hoping to see the facility in the ground by 2021. It has been delayed, and fundraising is tough during these times of COVID, but we're still moving forward. And hopefully we'll hear back on some of the government grants that we've applied for in the very near future. And we're hoping that that'll be a positive response. So next slide, please. Community engagement. This has been another tough one thanks to COVID. We can't go out and meet with the public face to face like we'd like. And some of our partners and the province and the federal government, we've been doing a lot of work, again, through Zoom calls, through Teams, through the electronic media. This has been delayed. It'll probably be a first quarter deliverable for 2021 as we work through some of the difficulties with doing the consultation. But I'm really pleased. Staff have really rose to the challenge, and some of the online consultation is very creative and very engaging, which is what we wanted with the public. So stay tuned. We will be contacting staff sometime between now and the end of the year to look and see how we can better align our programs, how we can better work together. And this helps inform our next strategic plan, which I'll get to. It's the last item on the list. Happy to say that we're making progress with salt reduction. And I did come and do a presentation, I think it was a year and a half ago, on the salt reduction program that we're trying to establish. We are meeting with the ministries, which is great, and hopefully the Attorney General. We produced a white paper, a discussion paper through an interest group that we formed called the Freshwater Roundtable, and it includes representation from the insurance industry, the land resources industry, the folks at Landscape Ontario. A lot of them have clients that actually do the applications, Smart About Salt, as well as the building maintenance people as well. Some of the bigger companies like Brookfield, and we even had McDonald's at the table and World Wildlife Federation. So we tried to make it as diverse as possible. The white paper actually, or the discussion paper, talks about two things. One is having objectives for smart salt application. And we know our municipalities are doing a great job. This is focused more at the commercial industry, as well as some type of mitigation for litigation. The biggest issue with salt application is because people are always tripping and falling, they're suing. And as a result, applicators put more salt than they need on to try to reduce the liability associated with slips, trips, and falls. So we're actually looking for the province to protect folks who have put on the proper amount of salt from litigation. And that would allow them to put on what they need versus having to put on a lot more. And some of the malls in our area, we're actually seeing application rates equal to some of the municipalities with respect to what they would put on their road in a given year. So it is something that we're hoping that will be resolved relatively quickly. So those meetings are happening within the next 2 weeks. So hopefully we'll have something good to report back about that in the very near future. A land disposition policy has been completed. It's just a policy that talks about how we would dispose of lands. And we've actually looked at a strategy because we hold a lot of lands that we don't actually use. They're not part of really our acquisition strategy, which is for the purposes of either protection or passive recreation like trails, linking urban areas to natural areas. We have a bunch of areas which essentially municipalities are managing on our behalf and through agreements and have been doing so for years. It makes sense just to give those lands to those municipalities moving forward. And that reduces a bit of the burden on our budget, as well as it improves the municipality's ability to undertake works. There's just one less person that they have to consult when they want to do something on these properties. So we're hoping to see that the report will be presented at the next board meeting. Once it's approved in its entirety, then we'll be starting discussions with municipalities to look at disposing of those lands to those municipalities should they wish. This is voluntary, obviously. So the next is we're going to continue our restoration efforts. We're still doing projects despite COVID. This is the good news. We're doing a lot of work. There's some wetland creation going on. There is a lot of stream restoration. We're working with the farm community still to reduce manure runoff and to improve crop yield by stopping soil erosion. So there's a lot of work still going on. And we'll be reporting out on that as we go. We've been doing some. One of the big projects up in your area, it's not in your municipality, unfortunately, but it was in Brock, was the Goodyear Farm project, which we're very proud of. And it's reduced quite a significant sediment load going into Lake Simcoe. As well, we're working with the province to implement the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan. And we do that on behalf of our municipalities as well, because you actually have more of the recommendations than anyone else in the Lake Simcoe Protection Plan and Act. So municipalities were burdened with most of the implementation. We're sort of the agent that helps get a lot of that done. And we continue to do work with the province, monitoring the lakes and rivers, providing that information so that we can have informed decisions on management moving forward. Finally, and I know I've been a little over long here, our draft strategic plan is underway. It will only be a 3-year plan, despite the fact that we've said it's going to go to 2016. Due to the uncertainty with COVID, we've decided that 3 years is a better approach, and we'll be working towards getting the final plan done probably by Q2 of next year. We're just working on the situational analysis. Some of the community engagement information is going into the plan, and we'll be contacting, as I said, your staff and yourselves, if you're interested, to provide some feedback on how we could do our jobs better, differently, how we can better align with municipal programs, where can there be value added, and where can we get a better return on our investments. So next slide, please. So our approach essentially hasn't changed. Our path ahead remains the same. We're looking at improving water quality. We're looking at reducing flooding, We're looking where we can to engage the community to help us with all our efforts. Certainly, there's quite a bit of work that's been going on, as I mentioned, with respect to aligning our business process with municipal business process, and we'll be working in partnership with that, restoring our natural heritage system, creating wetlands, creating those grassland areas, enhancing the natural system wherever we can, and working with the development industry in doing so. And I have to give them a big shout out. The offset programs that we've established a couple of years ago, the new policy with respect to stormwater management is having an impact. We are seeing improvements, and we're seeing revenue coming in from the build industry, which is allowing us to do more work out in the watershed. Approximately 25% of our total budget is now allocated towards restoration, and I'm extremely proud of that. So over $5 million is going towards restoration projects within the watershed. And that's the way that we're going to actually see some improvements moving forward, is that level of investment. And that's due in large part to the build industry. So I have to give them a shout out. Next slide, please. So with that, I'd be more than happy to answer any questions. And before I turn over the mic, I just wanted to acknowledge Councillor Emmett Yeo, who is our Board of Directors member from City of Kawartha Lakes. He does a great job, and he's very much appreciated. So I just wanted to thank him for his contribution. So thank you.
Thanks, Mike. Appreciate that. Sounds like you got things moving forward pretty good. So I'll get a motion to receive the presentation from Councillor Yeo, seconded by Councillor Richardson. Are there any questions for Mr. Walters regarding the presentation? Yeah? Go ahead, Councillor Yeo.
Not so much a question, just a thank you to Mike. He's been a great leader over there for staff and a great guide for the committee. And we'll be thinking about you in the future. And I'll leave it at that. Thanks, Mike.
Okay, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly.
Thanks to you, Mr. Mayor, through to Mike. You mentioned about working with the SALT, especially not with the amount that's going on in plazas, and you're talking to the government. Have you had meetings, or have you made any inroads in your estimation?
Through your worship, yes, we've made some inroads. The fact that we're actually in now meeting with the minister's office is a big plus. We had to go through staff, and staff actually did sit from both the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks and Environment Canada, sat on the Freshwater Roundtable, although they couldn't participate fully, but they sat as observers. To us, this makes perfect sense. The biggest issue that we're finding with SALT is this concern over the liability, which is what's forcing owners to over-apply. So if we have guidelines which are approved by the province through the Ministry of Environment, Conservation and Parks that say, here's what you should apply under given conditions, and we've worked with SMART about SALT on those, then the next step is to work with the Honorable Attorney General to make the changes to the legislation to protect people from the liability, the litigation. And once that's in place, we see the benefit occurring. We've looked at other jurisdictions in the United States where they've done some of this work, and it seems to be working well. And we also know that the institution itself, Landscape Ontario, for example, was saying a lot of private contractors can't even buy insurance anymore, or their insurance is so expensive it makes the business proposition infeasible. So they don't actually do it anymore. So we're actually, through litigation, driving people away from the business. So to us, this is a win-win. Not only do we get what we want, but the industry would be able to actually provide the service, and they wouldn't be profoundly impacted by insurance rates, which, if you can get it, are extremely high.
Okay, thank you. Any further questions? Seeing none, I get a motion to receive the presentation. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you for joining us, Mike. Appreciate you taking the time to give us an update.
Thank you, Your Worship.
Keep up the great work. Thank you. Okay, we'll move into a presentation. We have Standard 5.1, Standards and Guidelines for the Conservation of Historic Places in Canada presentation. Emily Turner is going to join us from the Economic Development Office, our Heritage Planner. And it's just, hello, Emily, can you hear me okay?
I can, yep. Can you hear me all right?
We can hear you all right, and you're on, so go ahead.
Great. All right, thanks very much, Mr. Mayor. Good afternoon, everyone. So I'm just going to run through a presentation today that goes along with the report that's also on the agenda. And this is basically just a look through the document which is included in your agenda package, which is very large. So I wanted to give an overview, just letting you know what's in there and its operational impacts. Next slide. Oh, is the, can this next, oh, there it is. Great, okay. So the objectives of the presentation today are just to run through a few things. So first, the scope of the document, just so it's clear what's in there, the role of the standards and guidelines in the conservation process, and the standards and guidelines in the municipal and the Kawartha Lakes context. So really just going through why this is being brought forward and what we're doing with it. Next slide. So just a sort of general, what are the standards and guidelines? This is a federal document, and it was developed by Parks Canada in 2003. And it was revised again in 2010 just to update it and add some extra things. And it was developed as a pan-Canadian benchmark for heritage conservation. So in Canada, Parks Canada is the primary agency that really deals with our federal heritage properties, of which there were quite a few. And so in the early 2000s, they started a consultation process with other organizations and agencies and heritage conservation professionals across the country to put together this document, which would guide heritage preservation in Canada, looking at how do we make decisions when we're looking at changes to heritage properties. Next slides. So within this document, there's both general principles and practical advice to guide decision-making for planning interventions on a historic place. So this document is primarily intended to provide guidance when that kind of work is happening. So this is an approach that was developed by Parks Canada, and it's based on the conservation of the historic values of a place and its character defining elements. So essentially, when we're looking at making changes to a historic property, how can we do that in a way that respects the historic values that are in that place and conserves those really important things that make it unique and important to local communities, or to the province or to the country, depending on what that property is. And this is a set of guidelines and processes. So it's not a technical manual, it's not prescriptive instructions. It doesn't say what to do in any very specific situations. It gives recommendations and process guidelines that people can follow when they're making decisions. Next slide. So with regard to usage, it's used by the federal government and its agencies with regard to their own historic properties. So when the federal government, Parks Canada, any other type of agency that manages federal assets is making decisions, they are using these guidelines to guide what they do. It's also been adopted by most provinces and provincial bodies that are charged with preserving historic properties. And it's also been adopted by many municipalities across Canada, so many in Ontario and then in other provinces as well. And it's used by professionals across the heritage sector in the private sector to help guide their decision-making processes. So when they're planning, say, for example, a heritage restoration project, this is a set of guidelines that those heritage professionals can use to make sure that what they're doing fits with the historic place that they're working with. Next slide. So within the conservation process in general, just to give you some background information, there's 3 real phases to this. So there's understanding the historic place, there's planning, what you're going to do, and there's intervening, so actually doing the work. So the standards and guidelines primarily speaks to the planning phase. So how you're going to do the work that you want to do. While other policies, legislations, and guidelines inform understanding and intervening. So that's everything from some of our municipal policies and bylaws up to the Ontario Heritage Act, which is the legislation that governs heritage conservation in the province. Next slide. So understanding, which is the first step in the conservation process, this refers to what are the character defining elements and historic value of the property. For us, this is something that we ascertain through things like conservation district studies, heritage designation bylaws, feasibility studies. And then we also investigate and document conditions. So that's looking at what are the current conditions of the property, once again, done through things like condition assessments. Next slide. So the next stage when looking at a conservation district, a conservation project is the planning phase. And this is what the standards and guidelines really addresses. So there's 5 key components to planning a project. So maintaining or selecting an appropriate or sustainable use, identifying project requirements, determining what the primary treatment is, reviewing the standards, and following the guidelines. So those last three are the things that we're really going to be talking about today. Next slide. And then the last stage in undertaking a conservation project is the intervening, which is actually doing the work and then carrying out regular maintenance once it's complete. Next slide. So one of the things that was developed as part of the standards and guidelines was this conservation decision-making process chart. And this is something that's included in the document. And it basically lays out different steps to how to do decision-making. And I'm going to run through each of the three things: determining the primary treatment, reviewing the standards, and following the guidelines, just so it's clear what those are. But this is how the document says we should be approaching our decision-making process. Next slide. So the first thing that we need to do when we're looking at making changes to a historic property is determining the primary treatment. And what that really means is figuring out what is the primary goal of this conservation project. So what are we trying to do? What are we trying to achieve? And that can include a number of things. So that can include preservation, rehabilitation, or restoration. And I'll go into a little bit more detail about that on the next slide. And most major contemporary projects that we deal with, they're rehabilitation projects. So those involve upgrading older buildings and giving them a new and sustainable use so that they can continue to be used in our communities and have a positive impact. Next slide. So from a terminology point of view, conservation is really the umbrella term that we use for all kinds of work on historic properties. And then there's three sort of subcategories underneath that. And it's helpful to understand kind of what that language is when we're looking at adopting different standards and policies. So there's restoration, and this is looking towards the past. So this is the action or process of accurately revealing, recovering, or representing the state of a historic place or an individual component as it appeared in a particular period in its history, while protecting its heritage value. So when people think of restoration projects, this basically means bringing something back to what it looked like originally. This is something that people don't really do in terms of holistic projects unless you're making something for a museum. So in terms of our day-to-day things on heritage buildings that people actually use, very few projects are completely restoration projects. Sometimes you'll have restoration of individual elements, but usually that's not the whole scope of the project. The next thing is something called preservation. So this is defined as the action or process of protecting, maintaining, and or stabilizing existing materials, form, and integrity of a historic place or of an individual component while protecting its heritage value. So this really means not doing major intervention on it, but just preserving the property as it is now. So that could be anything from re-roofing to make sure that water isn't getting in, to doing repainting or repairs. This is all under the preservation umbrella. The thing that we really deal with a lot is the next thing, which is rehabilitation. And this is looking to the future of a building. So this is defined as the action or process of making possible a continuing or compatible contemporary use of a historic place or an individual component while protecting its heritage value. So most projects that we look at, they're really rehabilitation projects where, say, for example, somebody is living in a historic home, they want to make some changes so it works a little bit better for them, so they embark on a rehabilitation project. Often that includes preservation or maybe even restoration, but in general, it's making it so those historic buildings are okay in our contemporary context. Next slide. So back to the decision-making chart, the next step is reviewing the standards. So these standards are conservation principles as defined in the document based on internationally accepted charters. And there's quite a number of those. Many of those are coming out of UNESCO. And they were all looked at when putting the standards and guidelines together in the early 2000s. And these are very high level standards. So this is not getting into the nitty gritty. These are very much broad categories of standards to look at when doing heritage projects. So there are 9 general standards, and these should be applied to all projects. But then there's also 3 additional standards for rehabilitation projects, and then 2 additional standards for restoration projects. Next slide. So I'm not going to go through all of these because we would be here all day, and you've got them in your package so you can have a look through them. But I'm going to give you a few examples just so you can see sort of how this might be applied. So the first standard I'd like to look at quickly, that's standard number 1. So this is conserving the heritage value of a historic place. And it means do not remove, replace, or substantially alter its intact or repairable character defining elements, and do not move a part of a historic place if its current location is a character defining element. So this is really all about how can we preserve those heritage features. So looking at the picture on your screen, you'll see that there's some really important heritage features to this building, which is a designated property in Lindsay. So it has that lovely gingerbread work, the pointed window, the nice shutters. So these are all character defining elements that help make this a specifically important building. They're defined in its designation bylaw. So if someone was wanting to work on this property, we'd want to see that they were retaining or repairing those elements. Next slide. So now I'm jumping down to standard number 5. So this is find a use for a historic place that requires minimal or no change to its character defining elements. So one of the things that we see often nowadays is that many people want to change the uses of historic buildings so that they're more usable in our contemporary communities. So you can see the example on your screen here. This is the Fenland Falls Brewing Company. It's a listed property that we have, and it used to be a livery stables. Obviously, it's not now. It's gone through a number of changes. But the current use as the brewery, it has allowed the building to retain its character defining elements. So it's stone construction, it's long and low massing, it's gable roof with some minimal changes to make it usable as a brewery. And this is a really great way of pulling it into the modern world. So our heritage buildings are usable now, while still retaining those important architectural features. Next slide. So the next one I want to look at is standard 11, and this is something that's specific to rehabilitation projects, particularly when people are looking at putting additions onto properties. And this is something that happens a lot. An addition can be anything from an extra room to something like a porch. So really adding anything on that's not original to the building. So what the standards are looking for here is conserve the heritage value and character defining elements when creating new additions to a historic place, and make the new work physically and visually compatible with, subordinate to, and distinguishable from a historic place. So this is really about having additions to historic buildings that are compatible with their existing historic fabric. So if we look at the example on the screen here, this is a historic home in Omemee, which has now been converted into a real estate office. They put this new porch on, there's a little addition onto the side, but you can see that this addition really complements the character of the building. It's still really clear what that historic section is, and the person who's done this work has really done a good job in making sure that that new section doesn't take away from the old. Next slide. And then the last standard I'm going to touch on today is standard 14, and this has to do with restoration projects. So this standard says to replace missing features from the restoration period with new features whose forms, materials, and detailing are based on sufficient documentary and/or oral evidence. So this really means that when people are doing restoration projects, they need to do their research. So we're not looking for people to put new features on willy-nilly. They should be looking at historic documentation. What did this look like a long time ago if we're going to bring it back to that form? So you can see on your screen, there's 2 pictures of here. This is a designated home we have in Woodville. One is a picture of the house that was taken last year, and the other one is an engraving of the house from 1880. So this is the kind of documentation that people should be looking for if they're going to be doing restoration projects. And it does exist, you just have to go and look for it. Next slide. So here you can see, this is just basically a rundown of the 14 standards that are included in the document, and a summary of them in a brief sentence. And I'm not going to go through these today. You can have a look at these afterwards. But they're all very sort of high level points of things that people need to be looking at when they're doing these kinds of projects. Next slide. Okay, so back to our decision-making chart again. So the last thing on the chart is following the guidelines. So this is the final step, and the guidelines offer guidance on how to plan interventions. So within the document, as you'll be able to see, they have for each type of different intervention, recommended and not recommended intervention. Now these interventions and recommendations, they don't suggest specific methods or products, as these continually change and they need to be tailored to site-specific needs. So these are they're very much high-level principles to make sure that they can be tailored to individual needs, projects, the unique circumstances that each property owner, investor, architect finds themselves when they're looking at historic properties. Next slide. So the guidelines, everything is divided into broad categories, and I'm just going to look at them quickly so you see what those broad categories are. And then underneath the categories, there's a variety of different subcategories where they have all those recommended, not recommended interventions. So there's a lot of detail in this document that really helps guide people if they're not sure about what they should be doing. So the first category they have is cultural landscapes. For us, the biggest one for that is our conservation districts. Those are probably our most recognizable cultural landscapes, but there are a lot of other ones of those as well. Next slide. The next category they go through is archaeological sites. And we do have quite a lot of those in Kawartha Lakes, and those go anywhere from sites in urban environment, old industrial sites, to our First Nation sites as well. Sites underwater, culturally sensitive places, and what kind of interventions and consultations, particularly with archaeology, are recommended when looking at those kinds of sites and conserving them. Next slide. The next category they have is buildings, which is really the most common thing that we deal with in the heritage planning world. And there's a whole bunch of different building elements that they include in here, everything from walls to roofs to interior arrangements, structural systems, et cetera, et cetera. Next slide. They also cover engineering works. That's our next major category. So how do we conserve those engineering works that appear in our landscapes? Next slide. And the last one they have is about materials. So this includes some very material specific recommendations and not recommendations in terms of how to deal with specific materials that people might encounter on their properties. All right, next slide. Okay, so I just have two case studies that I'm just going to run through really quickly, areas where applying the guidelines needs to be done, and how applying those guidelines can make for a much better project. So the one I have here, this is about accessibility upgrades. So as I'm sure most people know, historic buildings are really not accessible by today's standards. So we have stairs, we have heavy doors, dingy little washrooms, and they're not accessible for a lot of people in our communities. And upgrading them is really important in terms of increasing inclusivity. However, as we do that, we need to make sure that we're preserving the historic values while also making our spaces inclusive for people in our community who need those kinds of upgrades. So those upgrades, they should be sympathetic in design, use compatible materials, minimize visual impact, and have minimal impact on existing materials. So really the thing with this is looking for visual compatibility. So you're not seeing an accessible upgrade and it's really taking away from the historic character of the building. So there's two examples on the screen, and they're both examples of ramps added to the outside of buildings, because this is a fairly visible accessibility upgrade that we often see in our historic properties. One of them, the ramp is huge. It has this gigantic mass in the middle. There's a war memorial behind it that the ramp is completely blocking. So it's taking away some of the important historic character elements of that building. On the bottom, the ramp is much more clearly defined in terms of how it fits with the building. So it uses the same style of railings. The colors are compatible. It's tucked in next to the building, and it's not taking away from other elements in the landscape. So these seem like fairly minor things, but they can mean a big difference between making a historic place accessible and look great, and having this historic place that's accessible and looks really sketchy. Next slide. So this one is a little bit of a bigger example, and I think something that we're probably going to be seeing quite a bit more over the next number of years, particularly in Lindsay as the town expands and grows, and we get increased development coming up our way from the GTA. So redeveloping historic properties is something that's taken off a lot in the past 20 years or so. They can add new density and create new and positive uses for old historic buildings. So these kind of redevelopments, they're not a bad thing. They can be a really good way of preserving historic buildings, but they have to be done right. So when they're being done, there's the promotion of visually compatible and supported additions. And that's the big one when looking at this kind of property redevelopment. Most redevelopments have additions on them, and making sure that those additions work with what's already there is really important, So they should be distinguishable from the historic properties, but they should also work to preserve and restore the heritage features. So when you look at the building, you should not be staring at the new addition. You should be looking at the older section thinking, oh, what a great heritage building. And then you see next to it a lovely new addition that really fits with it. So the two examples on the screen, these are both additions that have been done to historic properties. The top one is an apartment building, and it's looming over this historic property like a bit of a Death Star, just with its dark color, its massing. It really doesn't fit with what's there, and it's not visually subordinate or compatible to the building there, which was a Unitarian temple prior to this apartment redevelopment. On the bottom, however, we see a different one, and this is Red River College in Winnipeg, actually. And what they've done is they've taken a row of Victorian storefronts and they've set back this very, very minimal, bit higher than the buildings. It's set back. The window patterns mimic it, and it's not the first thing that you're looking at. So you're not staring at this addition thinking, "Ooh, what is that?" You see your historic buildings, you see your nice new addition, and then you have a great reuse of this particular section of historic street in downtown Winnipeg. Next slide. So looking at these guidelines from a municipal perspective, there's quite a number of ways that these can be used within a municipal context. So for us as staff, they can guide decision-making processes on municipal heritage properties. They can be used as a standard for evaluating applications that are made from members of the public, owners of properties, developers, investors. They're a supporting document for policy development, and they can be they've been adopted formally by many municipalities in Ontario as the benchmark document for the conservation practice. So adopting these is something a lot of municipalities have done. And it's been done in one of two ways, generally speaking, either by a council resolution adopting it as the standard, as is in the report that's I've presented you with today, or some municipalities have also adopted it directly into their official plan policies. So both of those methods really achieve the same thing, but it's just two different ways of doing it. Next slide. So in Kawartha Lakes, what are the operational impacts of actually adopting this document? So in terms of our municipal projects, we basically already do this. So when changes are made to historic buildings that the municipality owns, our building and property staff do things like feasibility studies. They consult with the Municipal Heritage Committee. They look at different options, and to see what's the most appropriate. And actually, they do an awesome job of doing this. So this really is not going to change or dictate what they do because they already do a great job. In terms of evaluating permit and development applications, once again, this is actually already how we evaluate applications. So when I receive an application for somebody doing work on a historic property, I run through this decision-making process to see, have they looked at the standards? Have they followed the guidelines? Are they following these best practices that are recommended to us by the federal government? What the adoption of these guidelines does is it doesn't actually change our decision-making process or practice. It provides a framework for demonstrating how we make decisions. So basically adopting them says, this is the document we're using. It puts it out there in the public so people know that this is the decision-making process we use. So we're not making the decisions arbitrarily. We're not just saying our personal opinion when we make decisions around heritage properties. We're actually following a framework that has been developed federally, looking at best practices in Canada and internationally, and we're following specific standards as a municipality. The other thing it does is it supports the development of policies and studies to guide heritage conservation in the municipality. So at the moment, our heritage policy in Kawartha Lakes is pretty patchy. So we have some very good high-level policies in our OP, and we also have some very granular policies in things like our heritage conservation district plans that speak to very specific areas. But we have really large policy gaps. And what that does is it creates an unclear policy environment for anybody looking to invest in our historic assets in the municipality. So by adopting this particular document as our standard for conservation, it puts one of those policy pieces in place by defining our decision-making process in a transparent way. And it helps us put those other policies in place that align with what's going on in the standards and guidelines. Where this is really important, oh, sorry, next slide. Where this is really important is with the evaluation of incoming applications. So it provides a very clear decision-making framework for evaluating incoming applications regarding heritage properties. So this can be anything from somebody in downtown Lindsay in the Conservation District wanting to put up a new commercial sign, all the way up to a complete redevelopment of a historic site. And it means that when we're making decisions, the applicant knows what the framework we're using is. And this is very important when we're asking for heritage impact assessments. So when we have larger projects, a heritage impact assessment is something that we ask for. And essentially, it's a study to say how a proposed development affects a historic property. And by adopting the standards, we can say, you need to follow this when looking at your heritage impact assessment because this is how we're going to be evaluating it. It also provides a benchmark for funding heritage-related projects. So at the moment, we fund heritage-related projects through our $1 Million Makeover Program in particular. There are a number of other tools that we don't use, but we could adopt based on provincial legislation in terms of funding heritage restoration work. But we need to be accountable in terms of how we're evaluating those applications and how we're allocating funding. So we need to be making sure that we are providing funding to projects that fulfill conservation best practices. And by adopting this as our standard, it lets people know what that standard actually is. So when they're asking for money and we're providing it to them, we can be accountable to show that, yes, we're evaluating this based on what Canadian Conservation District standards are. We are funding good projects. Next slide. So just to sum up, so why adopt the guidelines? The big one with this is transparency in decision making, so that everybody knows what our decision making process is. This makes people a lot more comfortable because they know what municipal staff are looking at, and if things come to council as well, what kind of standards we're looking for in heritage projects. It brings us into alignment with federal standards, which is very important. It puts us right within that Canadian context, doing what other municipalities are doing. This is the municipal best practice. It's important to bring us in line with other municipalities in Ontario, and it also supports our current policies that we have, and then that also long-term proactive policy development, which is something that's really important to look at as we try and strengthen our heritage portfolio, make it clear, transparent, and tight to help guide investment in our heritage properties in the future. Next slide. Oh, that's it. All right, great. Thanks very much. That's the summary presentation of the quite large document that you have. So thanks very much. And if you've got any questions, we can do those.
Thanks, Emily, and thanks for summarizing that considerably large document we have. We appreciate it. I'll get a motion to receive, and we'll see if there's any questions. Councillor Ashmore, are you on the committee? You're the committee, right? Second by Councillor Elmsley. Questions? Councillor Ashmore, anything?
Yeah, thank you. Through you to Emily, thanks very much for the work you do. And I'm on this committee, and I really enjoy it, and I learn a lot every time I'm there. And the people there on that committee are really knowledgeable, and they certainly contribute a lot to the committee and to the municipality. I guess it's what I'd like to say is that I think we should endorse this because, especially right now when things are, the events of happening lately, last weekend in Montreal, and things tearing down our statues. And I'll give you another example. In Lindsay here last weekend, we have an historical business that was ceased operation after 150 years, and the historical plaque was taken and stolen from it. That was really disappointing, and because that facade was an historical architecture and building, and just to think that somebody's doing that, and maybe they're trying to do something we don't know yet, but that's an example of why we put those markers on that, to recognize that those are historical buildings and they need to be maintained. And so anyways, I'd just like to thank Emily for her work, and I enjoy working on the committee. Thank you.
Well, she certainly, Emily, certainly seems to have it under control. Gives us confidence in heritage. Councillor Elmsley had a question?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Yes, a couple of them actually. On these guidelines and standards, a couple of years ago, I thought Deborah Soul brought forward a report that set up standards when we were doing the heritage districts in both Fenelon and Lindsay. Were there such things then? Am I correct that a report was brought forward and it did adopt standards?
Emily?
Yeah, so at that time, Deborah brought forward, there's standards within the conservation district plan, so that might be what you're referring to. So they're within the conservation district plans they refer back to these standards and guidelines. And so there are standards in place for our conservation districts. And that's some of that in the presentation. I referred to some of that really fine-grained policy and guidance that we have, which is great. But those really only apply to the conservation districts that we have, as opposed to defining our decision-making process municipally.
So those policies and procedures will continue in place. They're not superseded by this document.
No, so this document supports the policies and plans and studies that we already have in place. So everything from our OP policies to our processes for processing heritage permit applications to our conservation district plan. So it's a supporting document as opposed to a superseding document.
Thank you for that. What about an individual's rights? Say somebody owns a heritage property, but they don't particularly want it to be designated. Do they have the right to not have it designated and to keep it as just their own property?
Yep. So this document doesn't really speak to designation as a process. So that's a decision that continues to rest with council and falls under the umbrella of the Ontario Heritage Act. So the Heritage Act discusses how to repeal a bylaw if that's something that a property owner wanted to pursue, and then also the other processes with regard to designated properties. So that continues to be something that that council deals with, designating properties. And you know, if there's an owner who has a historic property that doesn't want it designated, that's okay. We do try and work with people to try and make sure that the properties aren't torn down, which is why we have our listed properties in particular. But we're not aiming to impose designation on people, and that's not what the intention of the document is.
Thank you. Lastly, when we do enhancements to heritage properties, such as putting in a ramp instead of traditional stairs in order to make them accessible, we have had incidents where people have gone out and upgraded and put in these ramps only to find out that the city comes back on them and says, oh, you need an encroachment agreement now that you're tying into our sidewalk with a ramp. Is there anything that we can do to mitigate against increasing the cost to property owners who want to cooperate with us and make places accessible, but at the same time not kill them with costs?
Yeah, and I mean, that's not something that this document really speaks to, but it's something that I'm happy to look into in terms of how we can do that, discussing what options are for people who have those heritage properties that really aren't accessible and need to make them accessible. Because obviously accessibility is really important, and upgrading heritage buildings so that every member of our community can access them is the right thing to do. So I'm happy to look into that separately from this document. That's fine.
Thank you.
Thank you. Any other questions regarding the presentation? We have a motion to receive. All in favor? Thank you. That's passed. The report 511 is the adoption of the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada. That the report be received, that the standards and guidelines for the conservation of historic places in Canada be adopted as the city's conservation standard for heritage properties, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Want to move that? Councillor Ashmore, seconded by Councillor Richardson. Any comments, questions? Call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Emily. I think while we have you here, if it's okay, we'll just pull up item 6.3, and we might as well deal with it while you're here, and then you can be done with us for the day, for lack of better terms. But 6.3 is amendments to the non-compliant heritage bylaw. If you want to give us, the recommendation is that these bylaws be amended to be brought into compliance with the current requirements of the Ontario Heritage Act, and that the necessary amending bylaws be brought forward for adoption, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council. Emily, do you want to give us a 1-minute overview just on what you're asking of council here?
Sure. Yeah, so what happened is in 2018, Deborah Sewell, who was in this position at the time, undertook a project to update a lot of our older heritage bylaws. So there are requirements that heritage bylaws have to follow with regard to content, and most of our older bylaws just really did not follow those. So what she did is she reached out to all the property owners of these bylaws to say they were doing the process. She consulted with everyone, so all the property owners got to basically work on their own bylaw. And update it so that it complied with the Heritage Act. So those came to council in September 2018, and they were adopted at that time. When the bylaws came forward, 5 of those bylaws were missed. So there was one for the Emily Cemetery Chapel, and then 4 for residential properties in Woodville. So when I came on board last summer, I realized that these properties hadn't gone forward to council with the other properties. So I reached out to the owners to see what was going on, if there was a reason that they had objected to this, for example, and they all actually thought that they had gone forward in 2018. They had worked with Deborah at the time to update their bylaws to make them compliant, so that they were, and it was also something that the owner was happy with. So I think they got left out by mistake. There were 38 or 40. There were a lot of bylaws that went forward at that time, and I think they just didn't get added to the pile because the owners of them had thought that they had. So they were very surprised to receive my call. So this is basically just bringing those forward now. To get that done, they're the same bylaws that were agreed to with the owners back in 2018. Just the format of them has been tweaked a little bit just to conform to what our current bylaws look like. And yeah, so it's just really continuing a project that happened in 2018 and just getting those bylaws through the door when everybody thought that they were passed in 2 years ago.
Thank you. That makes sense. Can I get a mover of that motion as printed? Councillor Yeo, seconded by Councillor Vale. Any questions, comments? Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Just a quick question through you to Emily. With respect to the Emily Cemetery, does the board that runs that cemetery have any input into the bylaws, and do they still have some say now, or are they still relevant?
Yes. Yeah. So when Deborah originally did this project, she reached out to the board, and they helped craft the language in the bylaw. There was a site visit where they showed, there was a summer student, Brittany, I believe, who worked on that at that time. So Brittany went and did the site visit. So the board was involved in the process. And I reached out to them last fall as well to see sort of if they knew what was going on, and they also thought it had been passed. So yeah, the board was involved with this process from the get-go in early 2018.
Perfect. Thank you. Any further questions? I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Emily. A couple of good motions there. So thanks for joining us today. Appreciate it.
Great. Thanks.
Thank you. We got a couple of quick presentations. 5.2, charitable road tolls. Aaron Sloan, just a presentation to be received at this point. Aaron's with us. Can you hear me okay, Aaron?
Yes, I can. Can you hear me okay?
Yeah, we can hear you. You're a little bit faint, but we can hear you. So we'll be quiet and listen. So you're up. Go ahead.
Okay. Hello, Mr. Mayor and Council and staff. Thank you for allowing me the time to make this presentation today. Charitable toll roads. Next slide, please. Charitable toll roads occur in our municipality. They're also known as boot drives. They're a lucrative fundraiser for many charitable and nonprofit organizations, and they are traditionally held in the summer months, particularly on the long weekends. Next slide. Concerns have been raised over the years regarding, to staff regarding the conduct of charitable toll roads, including safety, accountability for the funds raised, impact on local businesses. After consulting with the local police services and the fire services, staff has prepared an amended bylaw to increase the safety requirements and to require reporting to the city after the event to ensure proper handling of funds raised during the charitable toll roads. Toll roads, it's important to point out that toll roads are municipally authorized events, and the reporting should be compared to the reporting done by other charitable organizations such as lotteries and bingos for gaming activities, and that which is regulated by the AGCO. We've also consulted internally to Health and Safety, Director of Public Works, Insurance and Risk, and Economic Development. Next slide, please. So given that these are municipally authorized events, there is a certain level of accountability expected on the city to ensure that the charitable toll roads are conducted in a manner that reduces risk to those conducting the event and to the public. Additionally, the changes to the bylaw and the administrative processes or procedures will ensure accountability for the funds raised by these organizations, including notification and reporting requirements back to the municipality. The reporting requirements are created by referencing guidelines created by the AGCO, Alcohol Gaming Commission of Ontario, for charitable fundraising through gaming activities. Next slide. So the next step in this process is the presentation today, and then staff prepare a report and return it to council in Q4 2020, and that the report include an amended bylaw that enhances safety requirements and creates a reporting requirement back to the city following a charitable toll road event. Next slide. Any questions?
Thanks, Aaron. We'll just get a motion to, it looks like the presentation be received is what you're looking for at this point. Get a motion to receive. Councillor O'Reilly and Dunn. Are there any questions for Aaron regarding the direction? Councillor Vail, go ahead.
Just Aaron, is there other municipalities that have bylaws for toll roads?
That's a question that I don't have the answer for, but I will note that and add that to the report.
Okay, and is this something that the Alcohol and Gaming Commission is trying to regulate, such as lotteries and draws?
No, we just consulted their guidelines because what's occurring with these charitable toll roads is very similar to what happens with the charitable lotteries and bingos. So we're just using that as a guiding document for this process.
Any other questions? Call the question to receive. All in favor? That's passed. So by passing this, your intention, we don't need to pass a motion, Aaron, that staff will prepare a report to come back in Q4 and it will include just what you said in the presentation, or do you want a motion for that?
No, I plan on reporting back, so if you want to make a motion, that's fine by me.
Okay. Clerk wants a motion. She wants to keep it clean. So the presentation, we've already received it, that staff will prepare a report to be returned to Council Q4 2020, that the report include an amended bylaw that enhances safety requirements and creates reporting requirement back to the city following a charitable toll road event, with options, I assume. So can I get a mover and a seconder for that? Councillor Richardson, Councillor Yeo, any further questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. Thanks, Aaron. Okay, 5.3 is Backyard Chickens presentation. We've been all looking forward to this one. Try not to lay an egg on us, buddy.
So thank you, Mr. Mayor and Council, for allowing me to make this presentation as well. Next slide, please. So in November 2019, there was a deputation received by Council And basically, it was requesting that a bylaw be created or reviewed to allow for backyard chickens. There was a petition also submitted at that point, and there was over 400 signatures on that. And as a result, council requested staff to bring forward options and report back on allowing backyard chickens in Q3 of 2020. Next slide, please. So currently, backyard chickens are not permitted in most residential areas other than on agricultural lots such as farms. Having alternate food sources such as small chicken coops has been a topic of interest for many families. It's been discussed many times over the years. The question regarding backyard chickens comes with consideration to the following. So there is a zoning bylaw. We have to recognize potential impacts. There's the question of residential areas, building permits for the coops, setbacks, location in the yard, etc. The health and safety, manure management, biohazards that come along with those, and number of chickens, and a prohibition on roosters. So the roosters would be the noise component. Next slide, please. Staff is working with communications to conduct a 2-week survey to gather public input and information for the future council report. This says late August or September, maybe a little longer than that. Early findings from that some municipalities that we've canvassed, they do have programs in place. Some are permanent programs and some are pilot projects that are just starting. So as a result, we've started these consultations and we're gathering information from the following resources. Next slide, please. So basically, I'm appearing today to ask for some direction from council. I'd like the presentation to be received. We'll follow up with a report. We'll show the results of the public survey and walk you through some of the processes that we've explored and approach council with recommendations late Q4 2020. Next slide, please.
Thanks, Aaron.
Any questions?
Yep, thank you. So is there any questions for Aaron on backyard chickens? Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
First of all, I'm a bit disappointed with the prohibition of roosters, but second of all, I would like to know that the 400 signatures, that seems a bit excessive, but does that just come from one particular area, or are you talking about all the urban municipalities in the city?
Well, that's really a question for the presenter, but I know that they did some legwork to gather those signatures, and I can present the results of that petition back with my report if needed.
Okay, Councillor Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. I was speaking with Councillor Seymour Fagan this morning regarding this report, and we're big supporters of it because of sustainable living. Obviously, there's parameters that have to be put in place, and we're looking forward to hearing what happens with the survey on Jump In. So thank you for bringing it forward.
Any further questions? Councillor Ashmore?
Thank you, you too, Aaron. Just going from emails that I have back and forth with you there, you've mentioned that your staff are 8 weeks behind due to obviously COVID and the like. How would you be fitting this in now that we're 8 weeks, 2 months behind on the present cases that we've got and the workload that we have, that we're going to bring on something new? I'm not against it, but I'm just saying, how are you going to work it in with the staff that we have, our current resources?
That's a great question. Through the mayor to the councillor, yeah, this year has been a very unfortunate year in the way staff resources have been utilized during COVID. It certainly has impacted my division. I've had a reduction in staff as a result of not being able to hire summer staff. And at the end of the day, it's all translated into a delay in response, reprioritizing of certain responses, and but we're working through it. This is one of these issues that is being requested for me to do research on. It's my report, not my staff's report. So certainly this won't impact their work on the research side of it. Potentially, if a bylaw is passed, my early vision of it is that it will be an amendment to the animal control bylaw, which we already have. This may result in some increased work to staff, which I'm very confident that we can absorb through our current workload. Hopefully COVID won't extend into the new year when this bylaw is amended. But I can say in my early canvass of some other municipalities, for instance, the city of Kingston, when they passed this bylaw, this type of bylaw allowing backyard chickens, to date, they only have 28 chicken coops that are registered with the municipality. So I don't anticipate that there's going to be a large workload, but we'll see as we go forward.
Thank you. So that the presentation be received, that a report be provided to council with the results from the public survey, descriptive information, internal and external consultation, and provides council with recommendations in Q4 2020. Councillor Richardson, you'll move that, seconded by Councillor Dunn. Thank you. Any questions, further questions? Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
Yeah, just a comment that may help Aaron when he's doing his deliberations. I received a surprising number of questions on it when I was campaigning the last election. It surprised me, you know. And when I say a lot, I'm talking maybe a dozen, like, you know, but for a dozen different people in different locations in the town of Lindsay to bring that up, I found surprising. I have no idea where I'm going to stand on the issue. I can't see any reason not to do it, and that's what I told them. I said, it sounds reasonable, but I'm sure once Aaron generates the report, I'll be provided with all kinds of reasons why I don't want to do it. So those are my comments.
Thank you. Call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thanks, Aaron. Appreciate the update. Have a good day.
Thank you.
So Councillor Yeo has to leave a little bit early, so I'm going to pull a couple of reports forward that are in his area. So 6.5, proposed surplus declaration, enclosure, and sale of a portion of shoreline road allowance adjacent to 68 Greenwood Road in Kirkfield. The report is by Laura Cornican, our law clerk, but I'm assuming, there she is, Robin is going to, so we'll probably just do all your real estate ones just here together, Robin, to again get you off the hook. So do you want to give us a quick 2-minute overview on 6.5, and then we'll just go right down the list. Go ahead.
Certainly. So section 6.5 of the agenda, being report RS 2020-011, is requesting that council on the 15th of September declare surplus, close, and sale a shoreline road allowance adjacent to 68 Greenwood Road, which is in Kirkfield. And this is adjacent to Rush Lake. The city did a circulation to the public and found that the public had no concerns with the potential closure of this shoreline road allowance. This shoreline road allowance, as you'll see from the attachments to this report, is already broken up, and thus the Land Management Committee recommends the stop-up closure and sale of this portion of road, shoreline road allowance. It would be sold to the adjacent owner, and would merge with their parcel at 68 Greenwood Road. The net revenue to the city would be $4,646. And if there's any questions, but that's the summary of it.
Yeah, Councillor Yeo, is that the net revenue for the next one or for this one? Because it says the net revenue we placed in the property, $1,564, just for clarification.
Oh, yes, my apologies, yes.
Okay, so that's the single one at 68 Greenwood Road. Yep.
1,500.
Okay. Well, at least we know Councillor Yeo's paying attention, don't we? Hey? So the motion is here to proceed with the sale to the adjacent property owner. I'm not going to read the whole motion. Councillor Yeo, you'll move that as printed. Second by Councillor Elmsley. Sorry, I'm struggling with you in the last couple of weeks, but with your name. Councillor Elmsley, any further questions for Robin? I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. 6.6, Robin, is same situation, 72 to 76 Greenwood Road. Do you want to give us a quick overview on that one?
Yes, absolutely. And this was the one I was so anxious to speak about. I already spoke about it to some extent. So this is report RS 2020-013, and it is in the exact same area, actually adjacent to 68 Greenwood Road, and further down from the broken portion. So it's still within broken portion of shoreline road allowance. This is 3 separate properties, 72, 74, and 76 Greenwood Road. These came to land management, and because the shoreline road allowance is untraveled, and the city had no plans to develop a road at this location, and because of the fact that the road was broken up so couldn't be turned into a viable road in the future, the Land Management Committee decided to recommend to council that this should be stopped up, closed, and sold to the adjacent owner. This is actually 3 separate parcels that are adjacent to each other in a subdivision, which means they haven't all merged into one lot, and it does appear that there's several dwellings on the property, so several homes on the property. They're actually all owned by the same owner. So after Realty Services received a request from 74 Greenwood Road to purchase their shoreline road allowance, the owner indicated they might be interested in 72 and 76. So although those additional 2 properties hadn't been recirculated back to land management for the same reasons that land management recommended that 74 be declared surplus, closed, and sold, it's my recommendation that 72 and 76 be likewise considered without the necessity for the owner to go back through the land management committee process. The properties here are again on Rush Lake, so there's a set minimum recovery for the city for consideration of the property at $23 per linear foot, and would net the city $4,646. And if there's any questions, I'll take them.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley, you had a question?
Yeah, thanks, Mr. Mayor. I was just, in looking at the properties, it seems that the buildings on those properties encroach on what is our property right now? Is that correct?
I haven't determined that. It very well could be the case that there's an encroachment. I do know that that 74 was looking at getting a building permit, and that this acquisition was tied up with that. I'm not sure if it was because of a minimum lot area problem, a setback problem, or an encroachment problem. Sometimes the map is a little bit off due to the distance from just due to some mapping errors at the registry office, but that hasn't been brought to my attention one way or another, that there's an actual physical encroachment on the property.
Okay, and just a question, the adjacent properties like 76 and 80, or 78 and 80 and 68 and so on, have they already bought the shoreline, or do we own it? And would it make sense to offer it for sale to those people as well?
So the property to the east of 68 is sold right to the road allowance, and in the appendices to the 2 reports, you can see that that's where the road is sort of broken, if you will. So yes, there are 2 additional properties that the city to the west of these properties, that the city could look at selling to those owners in the future. It appears that those properties are vacant at this time. So we're not, we haven't expanded our request, but that is definitely something in the future that if we get a request from those owners, we'll consider.
Okay, thank you.
Councillor Yeo, you had information on the encroachment?
Yeah, the properties, the map is misleading. The properties are not encroaching. The reason 74 and 68 were requesting to buy it is because when they redevelop the properties, they are too close to the rear lot line as it stands. So by buying the shoreline road allowance, they're extending their rear lot line, which in this case is actually a front yard because it's on the water. So it's for the future of building.
Thank you. Thank you. So Councillor Yeo, will you move the recommendation as printed? I will. Thank you. Second by Councillor O'Reilly. Any further questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Robin. So let's just keep going then to 6.7, which is the closure and sale of road allowance known as Dean Street in Lindsay. Go ahead, Robin.
Thank you. So this is report RS 2020 dash 14 at page 452 of the agenda. As the mayor has indicated, this is a recommendation to council for the 15th of September that the council declare a surplus, close and sell to the owner who owns property surrounding an unopened road allowance known as Dean Street in Lindsay for the purpose of realignment of the road. This property has been subject to a draft plan of subdivision. The road and the draft plan of subdivision is realigned from the existing road, which would result in the requirement for the developer to purchase this road. The city considered this at land management, and land management recommended us that council set a minimum price of $15,000 for this unopened road allowance. This would be in compliance with the sale bylaw, which requires a minimum of $15 per linear foot of a 66 foot width. So bringing up, that would net us $1,528.78. What staff are recommending is that this property be sold for $15,000 and sold to the adjacent landowner.
Thank you. Councillor O'Reilly, you'll move that recommendation as printed. That recommendation, seconded by Councillor Yeo. Does that recommendation as printed, Robin, put the $15,000 as part of it, or does that need to be added?
It's included in the recommendations.
Thank you. Any questions, comments? Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, just a quick question. When I look at the diagram there, that's a pie-shaped piece of property that's not developable as an independent piece of property. That's the way I would look at that. It's just something that's an odd shape.
That's correct.
Okay, that's good.
Councillor Helmsley?
What happens about the pedestrian right-of-ways, the vehicle, and the storm pond and the easement? Is he saddled with those, and is there a potential for future problems for him with those or her?
Right. So any easements would transfer with the property, and the purchaser of those lots would be responsible for the acquisition of any easements and maintaining any easements. The planning division has looked at the realignment of this road and recommends the realignment. So therefore is requesting as a condition before registration that the city sell these portions over to the developer eventually to become part of private property.
Thank you. Is that going to alleviate some of the problem, or it's going to stay the same? There'll still be a stormwater pond, and there'll still be the requirement for an easement, or with the reconstruction of the road, those problems will get solved?
I can't speak to that specifically at this moment, but what I can do is look into that for you and then provide those comments on the 15th.
That'd be great, thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore?
For you to Robin, we brought this up before about selling surplus properties. Has there been an appraisal done on this property yet?
No, so we appraise properties that are non-road allowance. With road allowances, in order to make it easier for the developer and the city, we decide to do a minimum set. And then if we can achieve a higher amount than the minimum set in the bylaw. There has been some concern from council in the past that these minimum numbers are quite low. And therefore, we're attempting to negotiate higher recoveries, more in line with what would be the fair market value. It is an alternative open to council, if you like, to ask that I come back with amendments or considerations even to the disposition bylaw to require appraisals, or specifically in this instant to require an appraisal. There definitely are some municipalities that do appraisals of all their road allowance and shoreline road allowance prior to disposition.
Thanks, I just thought that we had talked about that before, and there was a policy that we passed that we had to have appraisals done, but maybe I was wrong.
No, there is, and they come to council, but not for road allowances. That's why we have the linear footage price that's been put on them, to stay away from some of the smaller purchases and having to go through the cost of an appraisal. So you're not wrong, but you're not right either. So there you go. So we have a motion on the floor. Any further questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. 6.8, proposed direct sale of city-owned property, Juniper Street in Fenelon Falls. Go ahead, Robin.
Okay, so this is report RS 2020-015 at page 460 and following in the agenda. The city's disposition bylaw requires that our default is for open market or fair market sales. So we'd put a developable property on the open market for a minimum of 10-day period. However, in this case, the Land Management Committee considered a direct sale of this property, which is on Juniper Street in Fenelon Falls, and considered that it would be best in this circumstance to do a direct sale to an individual who approached the city requesting to purchase and develop the property for affordable housing, knowing that this is one of the city's interests in meeting affordable housing targets. The Land Management Committee is recommending to council that this be a direct sale rather than open market. This property, like I have said, is on Juniper Street in Fenelon Falls. It's to the north of Langdon School, and you'll see from the appendices that this is a sort of odd-shaped property. There are some easements on this property. To the south, you'll see what looks like an old road allowance. It has some servicing in there, and those easements would be preserved and transferred over to the new owner. They are for hydro and for servicing. The property itself was actually declared surplus in 2014 by council, but due to the extreme passage of time and an update to our disposal bylaw, we recirculated the proposal to the public to get and request council make another declaration of surplus. This property is traversed to the northern, it's sort of a triangular shaped property. It's traversed to the northern tip of the triangle by a creek, and therefore a part of it is EP and is not developable, but that's a rather small portion. More significantly, though, the property is currently unserviced. So that does provide a little bit of a complicating factor for anyone developing the property. They'd have to look at extension of servicing, and it's accordingly zoned open space. After council declared it surplus in 2014, Realty Services was looking at holding on to the property for future sale at such time that the property became serviced. So with an expansion of services in Fenelon Falls, which would net the city a higher return on the value of the property. However, with the intervening request from this individual for affordable housing, if the developer can make it work, then Land Management Committee is supportive of this request for a direct sale. It would be sold at appraised value plus all costs. The property is not yet appraised, so we don't know what the appraised value would be, but the city would recover as net revenue the appraised value. And if there's any questions, I'll take them now.
Thank you. Councillor Helmsley, you'll move the request as printed, seconded by Councillor O'Reilly. Any questions? Councillor Yeo?
Through you to Robin, will we have that appraised amount prior to the 15th of September, or no? Probably not.
No, we do the appraisal after we get council direction and prior to the final disposition bylaw coming back. And we'll bring the final, per the recent amendments to the disposition bylaw or disposal bylaw, we'll bring the appraisal in closed at the same time that the bylaw for final disposition goes in open. So that might be 6 months down the road, for example.
Thank you. So one of the reasons for the direct sale was that the buyer is proposing affordable housing, which is obviously a great need in our community. What guarantees is in this proposal that they're going to build affordable housing on it?
There's nothing with respect to this direction. So that could be made a condition of council. However, I do know that this developer is putting in a request through the affordable housing policy for some exemptions from fees and other benefits that can be provided. That's where, when you get those benefits, that's where you provide those, that's where you provide how that contract is made and how the restriction is placed on your title to prevent the developer from redeveloping the property for non-affordable housing. So for example, with this recommendation, the developer could go forward and sell for non-affordable housing, but they would pay the city the appraised value of the property. If the property owner wanted to obtain some waiver of fees, they would need to provide on title those restrictions to prevent it from the property from being used outside of affordable housing.
And you mentioned before they'll have to go through a rezoning for affordable housing, is that correct?
That's true. The property right now is zoned open space, and it's likely that it would be appraised at open space as well, simply because it is unserviced. Usually the appraisals are for their highest and best use. They always are for their highest and best use. And usually they're higher than what the current zoning is in these cases, but with servicing not being in existence, that could be a hurdle with the sale of the property at this time. However, if that the city would be selling it at a lower price. However, the city wouldn't be the one putting in the servicing expansion. So that could be a benefit to the city as well.
Yeah, no, that's fine. And I support the motion. It's an odd-shaped piece of property, and the affordable housing is certainly a great use for that property. So I'm just trying to get it straight in my mind. Councillor Dunn, are you good? Do you have a question?
Yeah, I'm going right down the same road that you are, because I have over the years observed developers saying we want to do this, and then wants to get the okey-dokey they come up with a totally different plan. I've seen developers change their mind 3 and 4 times. So I completely support the idea of the affordable housing, but I would like some sort of comfort level that they're actually going to do it when the time comes. But I guess we'll deal with that when the time comes. Yeah, I'm good.
Thank you. Councillor Elmsley?
Just to that point, Mr. Mayor, the group that is bidding for this is a group of residents who are keenly interested in affordable housing in Fenelon Falls, and they aren't traditional developers or builders. They're just ordinary citizens who see a need in the community.
Fair enough, thank you. So just as another comment, we received some correspondence based on grass being cut on this property. And just for everybody's clarification, that property where the grass was cut was the adjacent property to this one. The property that is being proposed for surplus here has not been touched in any way. So there was just some confusion by the person who sent in some correspondence that were concerned about grass cutting taking place. It was not the property the city's declared surplus. So just for clarification. So we have a motion on the floor. I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. 6.9, Robin, is proposed amendments to the real property acquisition policy. It says Sherry Dyer. Are you doing that one as well?
I am. So that is the final report from Realty Services on this agenda. It's Realty Services 2020-016 at page 471 and following in the agenda package. The real property acquisition policy, or 205 CAO 044, had that the city will always request an appraisal when we are purchasing property. However, which didn't make a lot of sense and probably doesn't happen that often, is if we are purchasing property for no consideration, so we are being given property, and so it's being donated to the city, and where a tax receipt is not requested. In those cases only, it would make sense not to incur the cost of an appraisal, as it would be rather useless. Other than perhaps from an asset management perspective for vacant land owning holdings of the city. Nevertheless, there are more inexpensive ways of going about estimating that than a ACII appraisal. So it is my recommendation that we do provide the exemption to the requirement that if we are obtaining property, but we're getting the property for free, the donator of the property is not requiring a tax receipt, then we don't have to obtain an appraisal. The other amendments in the policy are housekeeping. There are 2 sections which didn't seem to line up, so I provided some clarification wording to show how they work together. But other than that, the major or substantive change is to the appraisal.
Makes sense. Council, mover? Councilor Yeo? Councilor Dunn? Any questions? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Robin. Thank you for walking us through that, and have a great evening. You're off the hook.
Thank you.
Thank you. So let's go back to 6.1. An update on development charges and community benefit charges. Adam Found, Manager of Corporate Assets. Adam joining us, or are you doing it, Ron? Adam's on board? Okay. 6.1. You said 3 o'clock. Sit down. Okay, there's Adam. Hi, Adam. Can you hear me okay?
Yes, I can, Mr. Mayor. Can you hear me okay?
We can hear you okay. So do you want to give us an overview on this report, and then we'll see what we can do?
Sure. The report's pretty detailed, I have to admit, but it does lay out what has happened with development charges and community benefits charges over the last 15 months or so. The bottom line for us is that the community benefits charges regime has been made useless for our municipality because it's now really only useful for high density development. And as you know, we don't really have any of that going on. So that's why the report asked council to transform the community benefits strategy project that's in our 2020 special projects budget into a DC study, because the other thing that the legislation has done is it's forced us to have to again amend our or replace our DC bylaw, and that means having to do another DC study. So that's really the gist of the report, and I'm happy to take any questions that council has.
Thank you. So if we move this motion as printed, you're not going to come forward in 2021 and ask for any money in the budget for a development charges study in 2022, is that correct?
That's correct, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, thank you. I'm not sure about your hesitation, but thank you. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Perhaps a redundant question, Mr. Mayor, but I think if provincial legislation changes and we have to do it by another study, we'll probably have to do it. But what I was going to ask is this somewhat a result of the pandemic? And if so, is it possible to use some of the money we received for the pandemic to pay for this additional study?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, it's my understanding that this would likely not be an eligible cost in that regard. I don't think it could be directly attributed to the pandemic itself. It's true that the legislative changes occurred coincidentally during the pandemic, but I don't think that we can make the case that the changes are a direct result of the pandemic. They really are just a direct result of changes in legislation.
Is it possible to get some kind of a ruling on it? Because my thought is that the changes that were made to planning and to building was to speed up opening up and to speed up economic recovery. And I'm just thinking that, you know, this may be a fit for that.
I'll ask the CAO to respond, Adam. I'm not, yeah, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Through you, I do agree with the comments from Adam. I'm not sure this is as a result of a delay. In fact, we were facing doing these studies pre-pandemic, so timelines have changed for sure in the legislation, but the funding sources and sort of the nature of the changes haven't changed in this particular regime. You are correct and accurate that there were other changes, more broad-based, unrelated to DCs, but related to housing and housing provisions and development. And so those certainly will be sort of reviewed in the context that you're describing. But for the community benefits charges and development charge reviews, I would suggest that those are not eligible pandemic response funds or charges.
Thanks for that, and I don't mean to be argumentative, but we put money in the budget, in a budget, for a DC study. Has all of that money been used, and is this 70,000 additional to that, or is this 70,000 new money for a complete new study? And that's the reason for my thought that if we are forced to do an additional study, can't it be tied to what we've gone through?
Adam, maybe you can clarify. I don't think it's an additional study. It's instead of a community benefits charge study, we're not going to have to do that now. So we know we have to do a development charges study in 2022. So we're just rolling the funds over to do that. I think it's one less study that we have to do. This study, the development charges one, just costs a little bit more. So let's utilize those funds toward it. I mean, does that sum it up?
Yes, through you, Mr. Mayor, absolutely, it does. Both yourself and the CAO are correct in that we would have had to do a DC study anyhow, but because of the changes in the timelines, it just makes sense that we convert the CBC study into a DC study now and carry on in that direction. So we're just swapping one study in for another, based again on the legislative changes that are beyond our control.
So as an option, just for clarification then, I mean, we could always cancel this special project, put it in reserve, and you would come forward in 2021 with a special budget request for $70,000, which really accomplishes the same thing, but that's what would happen if we don't pass this motion and just utilize those funds for that study, correct?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, that's correct. And the reason why staff is recommending the conversion as opposed to what you just mentioned is that we would like to make sure we have a good amount of time to do the study properly, to consult the stakeholders and the public, to leverage the DC task force, to make sure that we dot all of our I's and cross all of our T's with all the legislative changes that have gone on. That would be a tremendous benefit for us. So I think that's why we're opting for the conversion as opposed to coming back to council with the same request for 2021. And also because we know the 2021 budgets are very much delayed. So it would be a very tight squeeze to try to get a DC study done in that sort of time frame.
Okay, thank you. Councillor Ashmore, did you have a question?
Yeah, I have a question through you, Mr. Mayor, to Adam. The last, I guess, was 15 months or so, there was a development charges task force, and they did it for free, and they did a good job. And why are we sort of reinventing the wheel here when we've already proven that a group of people and all the vested parties were at the table. I wasn't on the committee, but Mr. Mayor, you were on it. A few other councillors were, other members of the community, of the building community and planning. So why are we just did this process and these people did it for nothing, and now we have to do another study. I'm just wondering why this is the case, and why can't we look at public participation that was really successful?
Go ahead, Adam.
Through you, Mr. Mayor, we're actually proposing to do it, exactly what we did 2 years ago with the DC task force. So the DC task force is still in effect, and as the report states, we're looking to leverage that same DC task force again, because of exactly the councillor's comments. It was a tremendous success, and we found that it worked very well, and so we see no reason to not repeat that.
So why the cost then, Adam, is I think the question. What is the cost going toward if the task force is of a bunch of volunteers?
Sure, Mr. Mayor. The cost, of course, is to bring in the consultant, as we always have to do for DC studies. The task force has a certain role, and we're very thankful for that role, but they're not in a position in terms of expertise and time to prepare a very technical study. And so that's why we do have to bring in the consultant, and that's what the cost is for.
Thank you. Okay. Councillor Riley?
I think just further to that, we have to do our homework because we are dealing with developers, and we want to hopefully get it so that it's done properly and limit the appeals as best we can.
Thank you. So I'm looking for a motion for as printed. Anybody want to move it? Councillor Riley, seconded by Councillor Richardson. Any other questions, comments? All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. What do we got? 5-3. Thanks, Adam. Appreciate your work on that. And we just keep going around in circles on these, don't we? So we'll start all over again and we'll get it going, but thank you. So let's take 5 quick minutes and we'll take a break and we'll come back and do the rest of the reports. Okay, we'll call the meeting back to order. We'll look at Report 6.2, which is about renaming portions of Old Highway 7 at Meadowview Road. I don't know if Richard Hawley, Joel Watts, Deputy Clerk, is with us. Hello, Joel. Do you want to give us a 2-minute overview, and then we'll see what Councillor Richardson wants to do with some road names, because it's in her ward. So go ahead, Joel.
I was just going to let Richard speak to the process first, if he's jumping on. I think he is just right now.
Good afternoon, Mr. Mayor, members of council. The Ministry of Transportation has been working hard over the last year and a half to do this realignment of Highway 7 just south of Fowler's Corners. What it does is there's a realignment of Highway 7 along just at Meadowview Road. There is now a signalized intersection there, and with this realignment, it has created 2 dead-end roads. So the two old portions of Highway 7 have now been dead-ended. So before you is a request by the Ministry of Transportation for a name change and street renumbering. The section is now operational, has been operational for about a month, and the ministry is finalizing its work on taking out the old bridge over the railway, and they are working on creating the 2 dead ends. The city has a street renaming policy, and under that policy, the requester will bear the costs of all of the street renaming and renumbering. Joel?
So before council today is basically the request to choose a name from the master naming list. And this is part of the process that we have in place at the City of Kawartha Lakes. When there is a request to rename a road, we go to the master name list, which has been compiled from a variety of different sources, and includes politicians, athletes, veterans, or other names, prominent names. And so in the master road naming list, there were 4 names that were eligible for the Emily Township area. And so that's why we have supplied all 4 names to you in the report. We also had our Records and Archives Division do a little preliminary research on the 4 names that were available on that list. And so we're basically allowing the committee for a whole to make a recommendation today from those 4 names, and then we will then follow our requirements under the notice bylaw to send notice to the various stakeholders, the residents in the area, and say this is what was recommended at committee of the whole. If you have an objection or have another name that would be eligible as per our road naming policy, then you could provide that to us. We could potentially make a change if need be at the September 15th regular council meeting, but we won't be intending to pass a bylaw until the October, I believe, 20th regular council meeting to actually rename the roads. So it's up to committee today to pick from the names that we recommended, unless they have another recommendation that would be eligible under the road naming policy.
Okay, thank you. So we have a motion that the report be received, that the new service road, formerly Highway 7, created by the Ministry of Transportation north of Meadowview Road with its realignment of Highway 7 in the former township of Emily, be renamed 2. And recommendation, Councillor Richardson.
Thank you, and through you. At this time, I've obviously had some resident input from one of the cul-de-sacs out there.
I'm going to read the motion, so if you can just tell me your recommendation, and then I'll let you speak to it if that's okay.
Recommendation, Macomber Court.
which road for the first portion do you
That
want
would
to?
be the shorter road north of Meadowview.
For the, okay, let me try again. So for the north of Meadowview Road with its realignment of Highway 7 in the former township of Emily be renamed, what's your recommendation out of those four names?
Macumber Court.
Macumber Court, and that the new Southern Service Road, formerly Highway 7, created by the Ministry of Transportation south of Meadowview Road with its realignment of Highway 7 in the former township of Emily be renamed to
Switzer Place.
Switzer Place?
Yep.
Thank you. And that the office of the city clerk send notice to all affected parties regarding the renaming of the service roads in accordance with the notice bylaw, that's subject to any significant objections raised from the affected parties in the notice period, that a bylaw to rename both service roads be prepared, approved, and adopted by council, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. That's the mover. Can we get a seconder? Councillor Ashmore, thank you. Councillor Richardson, you wish to speak to it? Go ahead.
Thank you. Now I'll speak to it through you. At this time, I've had some resident input regarding a particular name for this area. It was brought up as Emily Lane, but at this time we have 5 other areas that are very close to that proximity, and I know that creates some emergency service issues. So moving forward, putting these 2 names forward, one, the first being Macumber Court, in Don Macumber, who was a warden for Emily Township at one time, which I think is a good way to honor him. And the second is the Switzer Place, which is a big farm and also a reeve back in the day in Emily. And it's really close to the area, which was the Bathel and Grassy Road area. So that's where I'm standing right now on that. Thank you.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore, do you want to speak to it? Seconder?
Yeah, thank you, and thank Councillor Richardson for that. Yeah, Don Macumber, actually, he moved to Nova Scotia, but I believe he's back in Ontario now, but he was on Emily Township, he was Emily Township Reeve, I believe, for almost 10 years, and the warden for Victoria County. And he did a lot of community work, and he also taught at Fleming College, so I think it's fitting for that.
Thank you. Any other questions, comments? Councillor O'Reilly?
I think you mentioned maybe going to the next council meeting. I think Joel mentioned October. Is that?
The bylaws will be brought forward in October.
Oh, okay,
This
yeah,
is a
okay.
recommendation to the next council meeting in September. No further questions. I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, gentlemen. Appreciate it. We'll move over to item 6.4, I think is the next one. I know I jumped all over the place, but 6.4 is the deferral of the Cultural Center Task Force. I believe Donna Goodwin was with us just to give us a quick overview. There's a recommendation. Yep. Hi, Donna. We can see part of you. There we go. Can you hear me okay?
Yes.
Okay, we can hear you. So if you want to give us a quick overview of this report and the rationale, then we'll see what we can do.
Okay, thank you, Mayor. Through you, Mayor. So the pandemic has sort of put a stay on the activity that was approved in January and in March, just before the shutdown of the task force, the special budget align, and the sort of appointment of the task force members. And so I don't think anyone thought that 6 months later we would still be in this situation. And both organizations that are the community partners, the Kawartha Heritage and Cultural Network and the Kawartha Lakes Arts Council, sent motions earlier in, well, I guess in August now, being that this is September 1st, that for the, they really felt that the study and the assessment for the cultural center couldn't go forward in the intention that was originally hoped, given our social distancing and given the shutdown that had happened. And so they've asked for a deferral to April 1st, 2021. And then, of course, the request for the matching funds to defer along with it. And that's sort of it in a nutshell.
Thank you. Thanks for hanging in there with us today, and thanks for that update. Councillor
Yeah, no
Richardson,
problem.
you'll move that motion as printed for the deferral, seconded by Councillor Elmsley. Any questions or comments for Donna? Councillor Richardson, go ahead.
Thank you, and through you. At this time, I'd like to thank Donna and our Kawartha Lakes Cultural Task Force for acknowledging the trying times and making a great decision moving forward. And it's a very important group moving forward to get our culture brought up to the forefront. And I think just by doing this right now, we're taking a very conscious effort, and I appreciate that from everybody involved.
Thank you. I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Donna. Appreciate it. Please pass on our thanks to the entire group. Thank you.
I will. Thank you. You too.
Thank you. So we'll go over to, I don't think I've missed any. I don't know if somebody's going to tell me if I have 6.10. 6.10 is Hope Lee, Annual Housing and Homelessness Plan Report. Hope's been hanging in there with us too. There you are. Hi, how are you?
Yep.
Good. Can you hear me
How are
okay?
you? Good.
Yeah, we can.
So Mayor, members, yeah, can you hear me okay?
We can. Go ahead.
Okay. So attached to this report is the Kawartha Lakes and Halliburton annual report. So it's reflecting 2019 local needs, and then the programs and services that we achieved during 2019 to assist with those local needs. So having a 10-year housing and homelessness plan for service area, which includes both Kawartha Lakes and the County of Halliburton, is a legislative requirement. So we first adopted that plan in 2014. And then annually, we provide one of these annual reports. Generally, it's due by June, but due to the pandemic and other priorities, we did receive approval to produce this year's annual report in September. There's also the legislative requirement for a 5-year review of the plan. So that review occurred over 2019. So there was a refreshed plan adopted in 2019 that now covers a further 10-year period starting this year in 2020. So the report you've got in front of you is the 2019 reflecting the old plan, the 2014 plan. So it's really the last annual report of that previous plan. So now next year in 2020, you'll see an annual report that's based on the new 2020 to 2019 plan. So if we looked at page 501 in your agenda package of that annual report, you'd find there the 2019 homelessness situation. And it's really quite different today as a result of the pandemic. It's probably our most significantly impacted area. So I really want to take a few minutes and talk to council and provide an update on that homelessness situation, but also an update on some funding we have access to be able to improve that situation. So overall, our homelessness numbers are increasing. So in that 2019 report you saw, we had 81 people who are experiencing homelessness. We're up to 106 experiencing homeless as of today. And part of us knowing them is also knowing where they're sleeping or where they're staying temporarily. So the sleeping locations too are quite different than you'd see on page 501 of last year's report. We also rely quite significantly on a place called Home. So that's the 19-bed homeless shelter. It serves both Kawartha Lakes and the County of Halliburton. And it's any individuals on a given night that don't have a place to sleep. This is an accommodation where they can go so that they're not sleeping unsheltered. So pre-pandemic, that 19-bed shelter was always at 100% occupancy, providing shelter to about 110 unique households annually. So during the pandemic, we realized early on that their physical space at 64 Lindsay Street South couldn't continue to operate and meet public health requirements. So what we did was we quickly moved them from that physical space into using the motel system. So we've always relied on the motel system in addition to a place called home, but now we're relying on it quite significantly. So last year we used the motel system about 9%, and this year we're using it 53%. We're also seeing an increase in those that we would have been saying are sleeping in a couch surfing situation. So they would be sharing, for the lack of a better word, someone's home, friends or family. And where last year we saw about 53% able to couch surf, we're now at about 30% this year. So that's really because as the pandemic hit and people were told to isolate or stay within their own homes, there was a little bit of nervousness of having someone else in your home. And often these individuals stay with one person for a week or so, stay with another person for a month, come back to the first person. So they're quite transient too between people. So lots of those reasons came about that they weren't necessarily welcome where they would have been in the past. So we also looked at efforts, those that were unsheltered, to bring them inside. Because during the pandemic, again, we wanted them to be in a space where they could meet public health requirements. So looking at all of those right now, if we looked at the motel system, we have 61 households or 82 individuals currently in motels. We have the largest amount at one hotel here in Lindsay, so 33 households or 43 individuals. So since a place called Home wasn't operating their physical space at 64 Lindsay Street, they've actually set up in the parking lot in a travel trailer at this motel so that they can provide that best outreach to those individuals. We've certainly continued on the focus of being a housing focused system. So shelter stays should be minimal. We've even invested some of the provincial funding into providing some shorter term housing allowances to get folks into housing situations. But I think we're all aware of the lack of housing availability in our service area. So although we'd have some funding to provide those housing allowances, we're having significant trouble actually finding the housing to place people in. We've also looked at going forward, knowing that we can't continue to rely on that motel system. And at best, a place called Home's physical location could become a 10 or 11 bed shelter, and they would continue to be challenged to meet some of those ongoing health requirements. So we have been receiving some funding. We're in phase 2 now of what the province calls social services relief funding. We received some of that initially in April. More recently, in August, we've received another allocation. Up to the second phase that was released in August, this funding could only be used for operational. Now the guidelines have been changed to allow for a capital component. And another difference between the first phase and the second phase is the first phase, we made decisions locally based on the local need and the local condition and allocated funding that way. For phase 2, we actually have to submit a business case to the ministry, which will have to be approved before we can move forward with the plans that we're considering. So we have what's called a planning allocation of $1.75 million. So what we're proposing to do with that is really concentrate it on the most critical situation, which is the shelter system and the shelter itself. So what we're working towards is a business case for that $1.75 million that would help revitalize that current A Place Called Home. So we know right now that the motel system is costly. So we're thinking that the revitalization and investing this in the capital component will give us the best investment and the most long-term investment. Right now, that motel system, although we're using provincial funding to help supplement it, is costing about $155 per person per night versus what the shelter was pre-pandemic of about $80 per night. So we want to try and get back to that 19 bed shelter. So what we're considering is the current site at 64 Lindsay Street South has 3 buildings on it. So the plan would be to demolish that front building, which is currently office and programming space. And we'd use a similar footprint to that building to rebuild a 2-story 18, 19 bed shelter. We would build that following the public health requirements. So instead of individuals sharing rooms, a number of individuals sharing a bathroom, this would be constructed in a way that has individual bedrooms with a toilet and sink for each of those individuals on their own. And then the back 2 buildings, which are currently the shelter space, we would renovate. We'd create out of one of them a larger rental property that would be a 4-bedroom house, and out of the other one, 4 1-bedroom units for single or couples. So we're getting back to the shelter capacity that we had before, plus we're adding 5 rental units to the available stock of affordable housing. So while the city will assist, I mean, A Place Called Home, it will still be their development project. They'll still maintain ownership and operations continuing. So we have been discussing this too along the way with A Place Called Home's board. They're certainly supportive of moving forward in this direction. And they understand that there'll be commitments of both them and their staff. One of the key things to consider is there's very short timelines with this funding. So the business case is due September 11th. If approved, we would have to sign agreements with A Place Called Home by January 31st of next year. Construction or rehabilitation has to commence within 90 days of that. And then the project has to be completed by December 31st of next year. So realizing that construction can take time, part of this is looking at different types of construction. So we're looking not only at conventional construction, but we're looking at a couple of different modular ways too. So one's steel and one's wood. So basically we'd be submitting a business case on the 11th that has 1.5 million of the funding going towards the new building. And then the balance of that funding being used to support the motel system while that building is being constructed. And then we would be reallocating some of our affordable housing funding that we currently have to help renovate those 2 back buildings, and looking for any kinds of waivers or fees that would be charged by the city to be waived as well. the project would also become eligible for some of the federal funding. So CMHC co-investment funding. So there would be an application submitted through that program as well, directly to CMHC, asking for their support that in both low-cost financing and some capital contribution. So I'll stop there, and if there's any questions, I can answer them.
Sound like you've got your work cut out for you ahead of you. Do you have any idea when you might hear back on your business plan from the province?
Yeah, they're saying we should hear back quite quickly. So we're hoping by the end of October, we would hear that decision. So they're going to be receiving 47 applications from service managers, all by the 11th. So that's a pretty ambitious timeline as well. But that's something that they've expressed to us. So.
And you don't need anything from the committee or council because your application has to be in by the 11th, so you're really just updating us on this proposal going forward, correct?
Correct, yeah.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, you have a question?
Sure, thanks. I realize that you're going forward with this proposal. I was just wondering, have you talked to anybody, Hope, on the tiny home projects? I know that some municipalities are using tiny homes, and I know you're in a bit of a jam with time right now and everything, but I know they've used, they're about 500 square, 600 square feet or whatever. I'm not sure exactly, but I know some municipalities are leaning that way if they have, I don't know what properties we could put them on, whether we, maybe Ron could help me with that, if there's certain properties, but that may be more farther down the road than right now.
Yes, so my comments were that approach wouldn't work for what we're trying to do here. We're really trying to get shelter capacity, which is a very small room now with their own bathroom located, where a project like tiny homes would be developing for more long-term affordable housing for someone.
Further questions? Okay, will you keep us posted?
I will.
We appreciate it, thank you. And we're just looking for a motion that the report HH 220-003, the 2019 Annual Housing and Homelessness Plan Report, be received for information and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next meeting. Councillor Dunn, thank you. Councillor Elmsley, you'll second that. Any further questions? All in favor? That's passed. I'd say thank you, Hope, but she's already gone. Thank you, Hope. Okay, we'll move down to, that's our report, so we'll move down to correspondence, memos. First memo is my memo I brought forward from the Economic Recovery Task Force. We will be bringing another memo forward in October with a further update with some more recommendations. But from our infrastructure pages, infrastructure projects that are sort of shovel ready and scheduled over the next year or two, the task force just wanted us to bring the recommendation forward as per a unanimous motion on their part that the Lindsay Downtown Phase 3 reconstruction project and the Fenland Falls Downtown reconstruction project be included as priority projects for consideration in the 2021 budget, and that this recommendation be forwarded to council for consideration at the next meeting. Really, the rationale is that for the biggest, from a reconstruction point of view, we wanted to pick a couple projects. We had a great discussion about the biggest bang for the buck, so to speak, strictly from an economic recovery perspective, and everybody agreed that investing in our downtowns is going to be the biggest bang for the buck in the short term moving forward. These aren't new projects. They've been on the books. It's really just continuing with the Lindsay 1 Phase 3, and Fenland was slated in the near future, and we're just making the recommendation to council that they consider putting that project on the books for 2021. So, Councillor Vail, will you move that recommendation as a member on the task force? Councillor Riley, you're on the task force. You'll second that. Any comments, questions? Councillor Ashmore, go ahead.
Yeah, no, that's fine. I just have a follow-up motion.
Okay, I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. I'd like to add under the second that, and Omimi Mill Pond Bridge. We need to tidy up after, I'll read it. That the Lindsay Downtown Phase 3 Reconstruction Project, and leave out and, comma, the Fenelon Falls Downtown Reconstruction Project and Omimi Mill Pond Bridge be included as priority projects for consideration in the 2021 budget, and that the recommendation be forwarded to the council for consideration at the next regular council.
Okay, you can do that. I'll have to ask you to do that as a, you can't add it to this memo because this memo's been passed. This is a memo from the Economic Recovery Task Force, so it's their recommendation that we're sort of bringing verbatim forward. If you want to do a follow-up, then you just do it not tying it into the economic recovery. If you want to do a follow-up to make your own motion for a bridge, then you can certainly free to do that, Councillor, but it's not going to be part of the economic recovery recommendation. That recommendation is what you see in front of you, which is already passed.
Oh, that's okay, just a question. So I can't, after this is passed, which it will, received and passed, I can't have a secondary motion, a secondary?
You can do a follow-up motion. I'm just saying you can't make it part of this task force recommendation because this came directly from the task force. So if you want to do a follow-up motion totally separate, recommending the bridge, but it's not going to be a task force recommendation. Do you understand?
Yeah, I understand. Okay.
Okay, so we have a motion on the floor. Did I already call the question? No. All in favor? That's passed. Do you want to do a follow-up motion, Councillor Ashmore, on your own?
Yes, please. I guess I could probably mimic what's here and replace the second that with, and I'll read it again.
Can I make a suggestion? Why don't you bring forward a separate memo in October? We're not doing a budget, just so you get the wording properly, because you can't tie it in with the task force recommendation. We're not doing budget till November, December, and January, so there's no big rush. So why don't you bring forward a memo at the Committee of the Whole in October if you want to make a recommendation on your own about a bridge in Omimi?
I'll do that, but I have a few comments if I could after this is passed, yep.
This motion's been passed. What do you want to make a comment on,
Okay,
sorry?
so I just want to say that I'm kind of disappointed the fact that Omimi wasn't included in this because, you know, small villages matter too, and the people there are really royally frustrated that they're always off the list. So we haven't put anything in writing that Omimi will get this. Now, Omimi should be part of this economic recovery task force because this is shovel-ready infrastructure, and that was the first mandate of this task force. And I'm quite surprised that I brought this up. I think it was 2 meetings ago to this task force, and Deputy Mayor O'Reilly did recognize it at the end of the meeting. But I'm just kind of surprised that it wasn't included in this motion because I think it's really important and it's shovel-ready too. And the people there are really suffering from it, and nobody seems to get, they don't seem to get any attention or any notoriety or anything in Omimi. I don't know what else I could say. I mean, it's Omimi's got nil, zilch. They've had nothing. And this is just a glimmer of hope just to add this on as something in the future that they're going to get. So right now they've got nothing, and you know, I'm vouching for them, and that's all I can say. I'm just one voice here, but I just expressing my frustration. I'm just passing it on from the people, the folks down there that are really frustrated that, you know, nothing gets put in writing about an Omimi bridge or anything in Omimi.
Okay, well, I know Councillor Vail you want to speak to, but I'll just comment from a task force perspective. You know, I'm not going to comment on your Omimi gets nothing, zilch, nothing, nada, nobody cares. I mean, those are just ridiculous comments in my opinion. But you know what? There's 10 shovel-ready projects on our infrastructure list, and we looked at them from an economic recovery, bang for the buck perspective, and there's no better investment of our infrastructure dollars right now than investing in our downtown. So that was the discussion at the task force. Bridge construction is a totally separate budget. Water and wastewater is a totally separate budget. There was a whole list of infrastructure projects that could have been brought forward. They're all important, not just the bridge in Omimi. And when the bridge in Omimi was put off last year because of financial constraint, where we're trying to live within our means, and that project got pushed off because there's another bridge right beside it, and we said, you know what, council decided that can be put off for a year, and I've told you this a couple times, that was on the condition that it be brought forward in the 2021 budget as a top priority. That hasn't changed. So when you keep saying there's nothing in writing, everybody's being ignored, no Mimi, you're not correct. This is being brought forward. I've confirmed with the Director of Engineering that he has 2 bridges coming forward as priorities in the 2021 budget, and the Omimi Bridge is one of them. And I've had residents call me from Omimi who are getting misinformation, and when I explain that to them, they say to me, oh, I didn't realize that. And so that maybe should be the message that you put back to some of the residents in Omimi. We haven't forgotten about them. We had to put this off because of financial constraint, and the direction of putting it off for a year was on the condition that it come forward as a top priority in the 2021 budget. We're not saying these 2 projects are going to get done in 2021 either. All we're saying as a task force, we feel from an economic recovery perspective, these are 2 projects that should continue in 2021 as a top priority. We're not saying any of the other ones aren't important. We're just saying from an economic recovery perspective, and I think that's where the message is getting lost a little bit. So, Councillor Vail, you had your buzzer pushed. Did you want to have a question or a comment?
I was just going to say the same thing. Like when that list came, the bridge in Omimi is already on their priority list for 2021 as a decision unit for the 2021 budget, as we've already discussed. That list of projects that the task force looked at, that was already on there along with the other bridge.
And I know we are applying for Connecting Links funding through the province for reconstruction in Omimi downtown. And we got money this year for the design. Next year we'll be applying for capital work to do some work, and if we get it, obviously that work will proceed as part of this, and if we don't, then we'll figure out Omimi's next on the list for their downtown. So their downtown's going to get upgraded one way or the other, but obviously we want to do it through Connecting Links if we can. So we're on it. It's just we've had other priority projects working forward right now. So go ahead, Councillor Ashmore.
Okay, so Councillor Vail said now it's on the decision unit, so that's a big difference between when it's in the budget book and it's in a decision unit or an add-on. So now, basically, if it's a decision unit, then it's an extra.
We don't have any decision units for 2021. It's being included coming forward as part of bridge projects for 2021 as a top priority. It's not on there as a decision unit. They're all decision units when it comes forward at budget, because council can decide to do all of them or none of them, or start picking which ones we want to do.
What I'm trying to say is that when you leave out a community, it just kind of turns them off because they think that they're being neglected, and that's my opinion. But just like budgets can change and things could arise and circumstances change that we might not have the money for it. But I just feel that by not mentioning Omimi, it just says to us that the smaller villages really don't take any priority. So that's just my opinion, but I'll leave it at that.
Well, you're right, budgets are budget, and these 2 downtown projects might not get included either if budgets come through and there's no money to do them either, and that applies for anything else in the budget. So I'll just, nobody, and I'm going to leave it at that. Councillor Vail, go ahead.
I was just going to say, like, Omimi's has the downtown project, right? That's one small community that has that. You know how many other communities in our community that wanted to have their downtown project or downtowns done and aren't part of that list?
If I could just clarify that, we've had a lot of talk about getting the connecting links, but nothing's been said in writing. So it's just, basically it's hearsay. There's nothing in writing that we're going to get the downtown revitalization. Like, there's nothing. When you talk to the Laurie Scott's office, they can't verify anything. And our staff have frustrations trying to get information from them. So as of now, please show me in writing that we're going to get this connecting links, because as of now, we don't. I mean, I look at other communities, the same population as Omimi, like Oakwood. They've got a brand new highway repaved, which is great, all the way from Manila to Oakwood almost. And that's great. But there is nothing in writing saying that we're going to get this connecting link. I mean, it's just talk.
Of course it's just talk. The Connecting Link is a grant application. We don't have control over the funding. Every year we apply for it. The only Connecting Link we have in the city is Omimi. We apply for it every year, and when we don't get it, we apply for it the next year. You've spoken with Adam, you've spoken with some of our directors. They're applying for Connecting Links again. We got money this year for design. Hopefully that means after design, there's a plan to construct it. The province is putting more money into their budget for Connecting Links this year because they recognize the importance. So, of course, there's no guarantees it's going to be a grant. That's going to have to come from the province. But if it does come through as a grant, I can guarantee you that the work will proceed in Omemee because there's nowhere else we have Connecting Links. So we're going to get there, Councillor. You're just going to have to show a little bit of patience. Any other? No, that was just a follow-up. Okay. 8.2 is a memorandum regarding Community Pandemic Recovery Task Force from Rod Sutherland. That the memorandum from Rod Sutherland, Director of Human Services, update from Community Pandemic Recovery Task Force be received for information purposes, and that this recommendation be brought forward to Council for consideration at the next regular Council meeting. Mr. Sutherland is with us. You'll move that, Councillor Elmsley, second by Councillor O'Reilly. Go ahead, Rod. Do you want to give us a quick overview on what the committee's working on?
Good afternoon. Yes, just a quick update. As you mentioned, we have the two working groups that are began last month on the funding working group, and which may be we're expecting maybe bringing forward recommendations to council through committee of the whole in October, as well as the GAPS working group. The survey was completed about 2 weeks ago with community organizations to better understand the impacts and the challenges facing organizations and service providers. That information is currently being compiled. There's quite a significant response rate. I believe it was just under 40% of those invited or asked to complete the surveys completed it. So that work is underway, and like I said, expect some recommendations coming forward likely in October. The other point I just like to highlight, as referenced in the memo, is the municipal responsibility requirement of the Community Safety and Wellbeing Plan. This plan is actually a mandated requirement from the province through it's actually under the Police Services Act where it was implemented, but it is a requirement of municipalities to complete. This was originally planned, required rather, to be in place by January 1st, 2021. With the pandemic, the province has announced an extension of the time limit for municipalities to complete these plans. They don't have a specific deadline other than they ask that planning continue. The memo highlights the information from the framework for the plans. As the community well-being overall approach under this plan and the community recovery focus of the task force seem to be fairly somewhat aligned, and that with the municipal requirement to complete the community safety and well-being plan, what we have done is create a working group of the task force that will take the lead in acting as the advisory committee for the safety and well-being plan. The framework for that plan, like I said, is fairly extensive from the province. It includes the requirement for an advisory committee body, as well as it specifies a minimum membership of that group, as referenced in the memo, in terms of representatives of certain sectors. That is a minimum for that planning body. So as a subcommittee of or working group of the task force, this advisory committee will proceed with that work. The task force itself will not have a direct interaction, mostly with this group, as it is being dictated by the provincial framework for the plan. But the subgroup will have access to input or feedback from the task force before bringing it back to council for approval. Council does need to, I believe, adopt or receive the plan at the end of the process, and that will likely be sometime in the likely the first 2 quarters of 2021. But the first meeting of the advisory committee and its membership hasn't been finalized yet, but that will be happening over the next couple months. as it is a fairly extensive process. And as we referenced as well, back just before the pandemic in February, myself along with the Chief Administrative Officer met with the two local, Chief Mitchell of Kawartha Lakes Police and the detachment commander from the OPP to discuss the process as there is a link to police services boards and those requirements as well. And both were supportive of the outline of the approach that we planned with the municipality taking the lead on this plan. So like I said, it is a requirement under legislation. So this just begins that process, and we will be starting in more detail over the next few months. Other than that, I'll be happy for any questions if there are any.
Thanks, Rod. We have a motion to receive the update. Is there any questions for Rod on the process? Councillor Dunn, go ahead.
I have no questions, but I do want to compliment the task force. It's headed up by two dynamic young ladies that are also leading our various working groups. I think this task force is an excellent task force. They're focused. Anybody that feels that their organization may benefit, please fill out the survey put out by Brenda Stonehouse. That's one of the problems we're still struggling identifying the number of groups that may benefit from this task force, but they're out there. And as I said, we've got a great, this is a hand-picked working group. Everyone that's involved in this group is involved in some level of helping out their communities. And so if you need help, get a hold of us and we'll do what we can for you.
Perfect, thank you. Any further questions, comments for Rod? Seeing none, we'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you, Rod, for the update. Appreciate it. Have a good day.
Thank you.
Thank you. The next memo is memo 8.3 regarding Heights Road from Highway 7 to Mount Horeb Road. That the memorandum from Councillor Ashmore regarding Heights Road from Highway 7 to Mount Horeb be received. That staff report back by Q4 2020 on short-term options for improvement of this road section, including pulverizing to gravel or life cycle extension consideration in the 2021 budget, and that this recommendation be forwarded to Council for consideration at the next meeting. Councillor Ashmore, I assume you'll move that? Yes, thank you. Second. Councillor Dunn, do you want to speak to it? Councillor Ashmore?
No, thanks. I'm fine. Appreciate that support.
Councillor Dunn? Call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. 8.4 is a memorandum regarding online petitions from Councillor Ashmore. That the memorandum from Councillor Ashmore regarding an online petition option be received. That staff create an online petition option in addition to the current hard copy process for bringing petitions to council, and that staff report back by Q4 2020 with options for an online petition that meet the requirements of the Municipal Act, and that this recommendation be forwarded to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. You'll move that, Councillor Ashmore, second by Councillor Richardson. Do you want to speak to it?
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Mayor. Just, it's another option for people to do petitions. Obviously, going door to door and engaging right now for the immediate time anyways is rather challenging, and this is another way of doing it. The provincial government allows it, the federal government has it, and I believe the clerk will look into the municipal rules that we have so we can make sure we're okay, we're doing it by everything properly. So appreciate your support.
Yeah, no, I think it's a great idea. Do you want to talk to it, Councillor Richardson?
I will agree at this time with Councillor Ashmore. I think it's the timing, especially with under the circumstances in COVID, that it's a good way of moving forward when it comes to these applications, and I'm supporting it. Thank you.
Thank you. Any further questions? I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Thank you. 8.5 is a memorandum regarding Grassy Road Life Cycle Extension Program by Councillor Ashmore and Richardson. That the memorandum from the two councillors regarding Grassy Road Life Cycle Extension Program be received. That Grassy Road from Emily Park Road to Hawk Drive be considered for the Life Cycle Extension Program for 2021, and that this recommendation be forwarded to council for consideration at the next regular meeting. Councillor Richardson, you'll move that. Councillor Ashmore, you'll second that, I assume? Your memos? Do you want to speak to it, Councillor Richardson?
It's a shared road that we have between us, and it is at its end of its life cycle, so we'd like to have it addressed. Thank you.
Considered in the budget. Thank you. Councillor Riley?
Just a quick question, not speaking against the motion, but aren't we going to have a meeting when we all get an opportunity to put our life cycle roads on a list? Didn't go through last year. There wasn't there at the end of the year. There was X number of dollars we put into.
No, that was
It's not life cycle. It's
what that was at the beginning of the year, and we had that come forward in March or
Yeah.
April. Remember, it came forward with any additional life cycle extension after
Yeah.
the winter wear and tear, and we used some money out of the reserve to add those to it. So staff compiles a list of life
Yeah.
cycle with Public Works for the fall, and then they bring forward a list to us in the spring with any additions for budget. We pass a standard budget every year for life cycle extension, and then if needed in the spring, if the want is there or the need is there, in the past couple of years, we've actually added to the budget to add to those. But that's, I think, what you're thinking about. It's not going into the budget process.
So, in other words, if we have roads that we want to get in life cycle, we should be bringing these memos to council?
You can bring it forward for consideration. I mean, that's consideration. Whether that goes into the 2021 budget or whether that comes forward, staff will look at it and consider it against all the other roads that they have in the life cycle extension. It doesn't mean it's being included.
No.
It just means they're going to consider it in the budget as part of that budget process.
No, I appreciate that, but I'm just saying that we all have 5 or 10 roads, so we could put it, equally in our own area to put in this. So, and there's going to be an opportunity. Is there any other opportunity for us to get them into life cycle extensions?
Not in the fall for 2021. It'll be in the spring when a list comes forward
Yeah.
of any additional ones that are needed. Some of the ones you're thinking about might already be included, but that's a staff decision that we don't get in the middle of.
I'm just talking about ones that aren't included. So, okay.
If you want to bring forward a memo, we can bring forward memos and council can decide what to do. Any further questions? I'll call the question. All in favor? That's passed. Memorandum regarding Logie Street Park traffic calming. Deputy Mayor O'Reilly, that the memorandum from the Deputy Mayor regarding Logie Street calming be received. That concerns regarding both vehicular and pedestrian traffic entering and leaving Logie Street Park be considered. That staff be directed to compare and contrast available traffic calming measures and report back to council in Q1 2021, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration. Councillor O'Reilly, you'll move that. Second. Councillor Vale, do you want to speak to it, Pat?
Oh, just briefly, I'm just wondering if there's an opportunity to do it in Q4 of this year, but if that's the earliest it can be done, because by the time we get through it and want to make sure that whatever the calming, what they decide of and the council agrees, that we want to make sure they can be implemented for next summer when a lot of the traffic will go through there. But if they can get it done the Q4 of this year, that'd be great, but Q21's fine, so. Joe Kelly's already working on it.
All right, well, you can call Joe Kelly and say Q1 2021 or before, all right?
Yeah, that's fine.
We have the motion, all in favor? That's passed. Memorandum regarding the 2021 Lindsay Legacy Chess Fund Grant. I don't know if Leanne Donnelly going to join us? Craig Shanks? I know you've got it too, Pat, but let's see if one of the staff, there we are. Craig's with us. Hello, Craig. So the motion is that the memorandum from the Lindsay Legacy Chess Fund Grant regarding 2021 Lindsay Legacy Chess Fund Grant awards be received, that the grant award and distribution process for the 2021 year for the Lindsay Legacy Chess Fund be suspended so funds can be utilized to assist with relief efforts to charitable and nonprofit organizations within the town of Lindsay, and that this recommendation be brought forward to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. Councillor Dunn, you'll move that? You'll move that? Got to get a seconder. Councillor O'Reilly. Director Shanks, do you want to speak to it? Give us a quick overview on where this is coming from?
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. So to you and to council, certainly there are two councillors present there today that sit on the Lindsay Chess Committee, so they can probably add to it as required. But I know that the Lindsay Chess Committee is very actively reviewing their programming right now, and they felt due to COVID-19 and some relief assistance that might be required by charitable and not-for-profit organizations in Lindsay, that it would be most prudent to, as the memo suggests, suspend the regular program for the 2021 year And if there is a requirement for relief efforts within Lindsay to go towards some of those groups, that the Chess Fund would be an option for that, and that they have a strong desire to potentially assist with whatever role and program that might be that take place. The only other thing that I would add to that is that I did have an opportunity to meet with Heather Kirby last week, who's one of the co-chairs of the Community Task Force. And she is aware of that as well. And their committee meets again on September the 17th, and they will be taking that into account when they are considering some recommendations to council as to how some relief efforts from a funding standpoint can be made available to both citywide, but specific to this specific item is within Lindsay, as the Lindsay Chess Fund can only be utilized for groups within the previous boundaries of the town of Lindsay.
So this memo is really asking council to change the terms of reference for 1 year so that the committee, when they're deliberating, can actually look at it a little bit differently. I guess my only comment is doesn't these funds usually help charitable and non-profit organizations within the town of Lindsay? And how's that going to change? Maybe that's more of a question for Councillor Dunn, but how do you see that changing as a result of changing the terms of reference? Because a lot of those projects usually get helped by the Chess Fund anyways.
Okay, under normal circumstances, and they're basically restricted, and there are some variations, but they're basically restricted to capital programs. The committee, and this was actually driven 100% by the civilian members. They're saying that because of COVID, we know there's a need out there in the communities for these organizations to address it, and now all of a sudden we're moving into spending money on operating expenses. So if, and I'm just going to make stuff up, but if the Boys and Girls Club can't meet their needs to provide PPEs for their clients and for their staff in order to run their programs, that would be an operating expense, which wouldn't normally be covered by the Chess Fund. The various senior citizens organizations that may have exactly the same types of restrictions. Maybe they'd like to get back to their weekly card games and so on and so forth, but they can't afford the operating stuff that they need in order to do that. Legions would be another example. Where we're running into a challenge is we're still trying to identify, number one, the organizations that need help, because not all charitable organizations need help depending on their funding base, and we don't know the extent of the funding. All the Chess Fund is saying is that in this particular year, under these particular circumstances, maybe that money is better spent helping these organizations with their operating expenses and not get involved in their capital expenses. So all they're saying is they don't want to. There's no indication that they're trying to control it. They're just saying that we're going to set aside what we would normally do, or we would like to set aside what we would normally do, and let the city know, specifically in this particular case, the people of Lindsay know that we're prepared to use those monies to help out in this manner. And of course, they also threw in the caveat, or one of the members did, that if there's money left over, we just want it tacked into next year's, into the 2021 budget, because we want to get back to doing what we normally do. To me, it made such perfect sense. And as I said, this came 100% from the civilian members of the task force. So they just they're trying to say we want to help.
No, and you know what? I totally support. I guess where I'm, and maybe it's a question for the director, we're changing the terms of reference that they not distribute the funds for this year so they can be utilized to charitable. We're not changing the terms of reference to say they can be used for operating, because my understanding is the terms of reference say they can only be used for capital projects, and yet you're saying this motion is changing it where they can be allowed to operate, and I'm not so sure it is.
When we started these task forces, and I understand both in the economic task force and in this task force, sources of fundings that were identified as being potentially available to the two different task forces were the chest funds. When I attended my first meeting of the Community Recovery Task Force, those were some of the sources of funding that were identified that might potentially be available to address those needs. All the chest fund is saying, or all this chest fund is saying, is that we want to be on board. We want to be there with you to help. Now, I have no idea when the Recovery Task Force, the Community Recovery Task Force finally makes their recommendations. I have no idea, because we don't have an idea of what the process will be, because some of the funding will be through the province, some through the federal government, some through private organizations that fund. We have no idea what the application process will look like. All the chest fund is trying to say is we want to help and we want to be there. And if that means delaying spending money that we would normally spend in 2020 to spending in 2021, all they're saying is we want to help.
Okay, so so I guess, and Director, help me out. Do you see this as just if something comes forward with one of these groups where it is applied to operating, which under the terms of reference is not allowed to, then a further recommendation would come forward to council to amend it once you know what the direction is of the committee going forward? Is that the intent? Maybe I'm just getting too far ahead of myself. Right now, they just want to change the process, and then when we know a little bit more about what the money's going to be used for, we might have to make a further amendment to the terms of reference. Is that how you're reading it as well?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I would say you're exactly correct. Yes, that right now this is just a notification to council from the committee that they're open to assisting, as Councillor Dunn has suggested. And once the understanding of how that assistance can be provided, and Councillor Dunn's correct, it will be providing for operational relief, because right now there's not as well for that. So once the understanding of the level of funds required, what it's for, then the terms of reference could be changed to address exactly those things that you're saying. Because I think if the need is not there for chest funds to go towards relief efforts, then potentially there is the option there as well to fund normal programs, but maybe to a limited level next year. So this is really just information for council to be aware that there is potentially a terms of reference change, and that the chest committee supports that at this time.
Great, thank you. That helps a lot. Councillor O'Reilly, go ahead.
Yeah, thank you. Maybe through you to Craig. Maybe it's more of a committee. I don't know. Maybe staff. When we'll say 10 applications come in, who's going to decide the criteria? It's going to be a question of, like, for our legacy chest fund now, we have a criteria, and whatever, and you have to fit the criteria. I mean, whatever. But for this is something brand new, and I'm speaking in support of the motion, but I'm just kind of wondering how we're going to decide what the criteria is going to be, or is that something you're going to come forward with a recommendation, or the committee, or have you any thoughts on that?
Through you, Mr. Mayor, to the councillor, I think that will have to be part of the terms of reference, and that will be decided upon, to be quite honest with you, probably through the two groups that are out there, one being council, yourselves, and the other being through the recommendations of the community task force that they would be making. So not yet to be determined, but that would be part of both the terms of reference of the change to the chest committee, and more so through the recommendations from the community task force. That would be my understanding and my recommendation.
Yep, you're getting ahead of it like I was. Yeah, you're thinking ahead of it like I was. So that's great. So that's an update, and that came from the committee, and I support that wholeheartedly. Any other questions or comments for the director? Seeing none. Do we have a mover and a seconder? Yeah, we did. All in favor? That's passed. Thanks, Director. Thanks for sticking with us for a while. And our last memo is 8.8, a memorandum regarding open-air burning and fireworks from Mark Pankhurst, Chief of the Fire Service. I believe Mark is with us. He's on the phone? Okay, so I'll read the memo. That memo from the Fire Chief regarding open-air burning and the discharge of fireworks be received. That staff bring forward a bylaw to restrict the times of discharge of consumer fireworks to between dusk and 11 p.m. Victoria Day, the day immediately preceding Victoria Day, the day after immediately Victoria Day, Canada Day, and the day immediately preceding Canada Day, or the day immediately following Canada Day, and that a bylaw include the following regarding the sale of fireworks. No person shall sell any firecrackers. No person shall sell any prohibited fireworks. No person shall sell consumer fireworks except on the following days: Victoria Day and Canada Day, and each of the 7 business days immediately preceding Victoria Day and Canada Day, and that staff bring forward a bylaw to prohibit open-air burning in Lindsay as follows. No open-air burning permitted in the built-up geographical area of Lindsay, and that this recommendation be forwarded to council for consideration at the next regular council meeting. So that's a recommendation from the fire chief. Does anybody want to move that? And the chief's on the line. We can ask him some questions or get some feedback from him. Councillor O'Reilly, you'll move that? Anybody want to second it? What, we're all afraid of fireworks? I'll second it. Can I second a motion? I can't second a motion. Call for a seconder. You'll second it for discussion? Okay, thank you. Fire Chief, Mr. Pankhurst, are you there?
Yeah, I'm here, Mr. Mayor.
Okay, do you want to give us a quick overview on your rationale for bringing this forward?
Sure, Mr. Mayor, to council. So the rationale, we'll start with the fireworks. Every year we seem to get more and more complaints. They come through my office. I know they come to your office. I know they come to different councilors' office, and we get the call. Also, we have a lot of consultation with bylaw. And, you know, it's the general feeling that people would like to see some more controls over it. I know down south in the Durham region area, as an example, Ajax has a very similar bylaw, and it seems to cut down, you know, the unnecessary noise, the fireworks going off at 3 in the morning, waking people up, scaring pets, scaring livestock, those kinds of things. So, you know, it's before council. It's a recommendation based on the complaints and some of the conversations that we've had for council to consider, you know, making some changes to the bylaw in that regard. The second part of it is, again, my office, our staff, fire prevention, I know you, Mr. Mayor, and members of council receive, you know, inquiries and complaints about burning in the built-up areas. Again, you know, we have a pretty stringent bylaw, and within the built-up areas, it's pretty hard to burn, but still people can. And, you know, we have an aging population within town. The smoke is a bit of a nuisance on some of the hotter days. And again, we get those complaints. It's just maybe time to have a conversation about restricting fires or burning in the built-up areas to avoid those nuisance calls and those complaints from coming in. And that's basically it.
Thank you. Councillor Riley, you moved the motion. Do you want to speak to it?
To you, Mr. Mayor, I think it's very straightforward. Just one question to Mark. If you were hosting a wedding outside of these days that are there presented, because sometimes they have a number of fireworks at weddings now, would there be a possibility of getting a special permit?
Yes, I don't think we'd be opposed to a special permit. You know, we do have special permits for other things, so that's a consideration that we'll bring into the report when we bring it back.
Yep, special events, it's in the memo. Special events can apply for an individual permit. I won't speak to the burning in Lindsay. I don't hear a whole lot about it, but as far as the fireworks go, from somebody who lives in the rural area, it is absolutely ridiculous, in my opinion, the amount of fireworks people set off. I mean, it literally goes on 5 days a week during the summertime, and they're right, like, seniors are jumping all over the place. I'm jumping, pets are running all over the place, and sometimes it's at 2 o'clock in the morning, sometimes it's at 7 o'clock at night, and it just seems like people come up from the city or they get their family up and they think it's a free-for-all to have fireworks, and it's really not fair to other people that live in the area. So regulating, I have no problem with fireworks. I love fireworks. Regulating it around certain days, certain weekends, you expect it, but a free-for-all where people just feel they can set off fireworks any day of the summer, to me is just very irresponsible on their behalf, and I welcome any kind of a memo that brings forward some kind of control over the fireworks. So that's my rant for the day. Councillor Elmsley, go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Mayor. Of course, my concern was that with the permits, as long as special permits for fireworks are allowed, I'm in favor of it. Because I agree, I think it's out of hand the way fireworks get done. I was wondering if we could split the motion and do fireworks separate from the burn, because I think there are things now like some people have propane fire pits in their backyard. They have, fire pits that they use for various things. And so my request would be, can we split this motion?
Yeah, I actually think that's a great idea. I thought about it. You okay with that? And you're okay with that, Councillor Richardson? So let's just deal with the part of the memo. Just change the memo. So we'll take that motion off the floor. We can do whatever we want, right? Yeah. That the September 1st memorandum from Mark Pankhurst regarding discharge of fireworks be received, and then let's just deal with the fireworks portion of it, and then we'll do the second one as a follow-up. So you'll move the fireworks portion of it, Councillor, and Councillor Richardson as before. Thank you. And Councillor Dunn, you had a comment. Go ahead.
Well, I'm just a little tiny bit more comfortable now that we're going to allow permits, because I've been to 50th anniversaries where you have professionals that come in, they hire a company that comes in and sets them off. It's, so I agree with the time. I think there should be a restriction on the time. No, covered by our noise bylaw. 11 o'clock, go to bed. Or in my case, 9 o'clock, go to bed. I don't care. But anyway, 11 o'clock, go to bed, quit shooting the darn things off. So as long as we have permits, I'm more comfortable on the fireworks until we get down to the part where the buying and selling occurs. No person to sell. Like, I got a stockpile of fireworks, and we're having that same darn wedding, and I can't sell them now. So I think the sale of fireworks, there's certain rules and regulations. They've got to be sold in a safe manner. It's all covered under, I'm sure, a couple of federal statutes about when they can be sold and bought. So I don't think that should form part of the bylaw. I think firecrackers are illegal anyway. I don't know. I simply don't know. While to say you can't sell prohibited firecracker or fireworks, if it's prohibited, you can't sell it regardless of whether or not you have a bylaw saying you can't sell it. If they're prohibited by federal law, probably. So I have it's a really expansive quest, and I think it's got to be tightened up. I wouldn't have probably the second section on the sale of firecrackers. I wouldn't have that included there at all. And the other part, I'm assuming that if we're going to have permits for special events, that Canada Day and what's the other one? Victoria. Can we call it Victoria Day? Do we still call it Victoria Day? We haven't changed that yet. Good. God bless her. Okay, so I'm assuming now by reading this that special occasions for everything else but Victoria Day and Canada Day, and I can live with that part. Certainly the timing I can live with, no issue. So those are my comments, but I can't support the sale and that stuff.
Okay. So Chief, just for clarification, when you say the sale, you're talking about the retail sale from retail outlets or consumer or corner stores that sell fireworks at certain times of year. Is that what you're referring to?
Yes, that's correct.
Thank you. Councillor Vail?
I feel better with the comments about permitting. I guess my only concern is when I went through this report, and I just went through it here again, there's nowhere in here that says we're going to permit it. The only permitting section I can see is near the end where it says the recommendations for fireworks would not apply to professional firework displays as they already go through a permitting process. So I guess my concern is, are we going to put in a process that if somebody wanted to do fireworks for a special event, that there is going to be a City of Kawartha Lakes permitting process. And then my other concern is, I'll echo Councillor Dunn, I would like to see the retail end of it taken out of this, right? Based on our location, you've got businesses in Bobcaygeon that border Trent Lakes, and Trent Lakes doesn't have a bylaw, to my knowledge, that prohibits it. So you're creating red tape for businesses. I've got a store in Bolsover, which is the same thing, borders on Mara Township. You're taking a section out of their business. So that those are my two concerns.
Thank you. Councillor Ashmore?
Clarification, we've got 5 that's there. Are we dealing with a third that right now for fireworks?
Right now, we're dealing with the fireworks, so the times when somebody can set off fireworks and the retail sale of fireworks. The third that, I guess, is regarding open-air burning. We're going to do that in a separate motion. So we're just dealing with the 2 that's that apply to fireworks.
Okay. Just, I echo what Councillor Vale said. I mean, it's going to be hard to regulate, and who's going to be going into all these stores and telling them to, you know, how they're going to be selling fireworks? I mean, is it going to be like selling ammunition? I mean, it's going to be to the point where you're going to have to be so much red tape. I hear more gunshots where I am than anything else. I'm a mile from the lake, but I hear a lot of duck hunters, and that's the only complaint I get. I don't get many fireworks displays, although I'm in a rural area and I like that, but I hear more gunshots than anything. That's more that scares anything. That spooks people. I mean, they're duck hunters, they do that, but I couldn't imagine living around the lake, and they hear that all the time, so that's probably the biggest complaint right now, not fireworks. But I do know that they're dangerous, and they do, especially when it's dry. I mean, you have to handle them with care, and so I don't know.
Well, I can tell you, if Councillor Yeo was here, he'd probably agree that fireworks in the north, I hear a lot from residents around lakes in the north, the fireworks are a bit out of control just from a so we're talking about some different ideas here. So is there an I gotcha. Let me just speak first. I gotcha. Is there an appetite to change this motion? I'll ask the mover and a seconder to take out the retail portion about the stores. I mean, I don't disagree that, you know, we're banning them. You can't set them off. You want to go buy them 2 weeks before, go ahead. You're not allowed to set them off. So I understand where that's coming from, but you make a good argument, Councillor Vale. So why don't we amend the motion to take out the retail portion about selling? Let's just control when they can be set off, and add that this part of this bylaw coming forward include a process for special event permitting as part of the bylaw, and that way we know it's included, not just professional fireworks. So what do you think? Are you okay with that, Councillor O'Reilly? Madam Clerk, you got that? Are you okay with that as a seconder?
I second that, absolutely.
Do you want to speak? Go ahead.
No, I want to say the same. Out in my area, I've got a ridiculous amount of complaints of rogue fireworks this year, and I think this is a good way of moving forward and sending the message out there that, you know, there's certain times that this can happen during the year. I do, as Councillor Vale, have some issues when it comes to the permitting of selling, just because it's going to be hard to monitor that. I mean, I know that you can go into your local store and, you know, you see them and you buy them and then you set them off, and that's usually your rogue players that are out there doing it right now. So it's a catch-22 on how we do this, but I would support not controlling that part of the.
Yeah, and if it doesn't, you know, if we find it, we can always add it later on, right? I mean, we can always make that amendment, at least, and, you know, and I compliment the fire chief for bringing this forward, because I think it is an issue, and he's heard about it. We've certainly heard about it, a lot of us, and, you know, at least we're trying to put something together. So, Councillor Elmsley, you had your hand up earlier, or did we cover it?
I was going to ask for a friendly that the retail portion be removed.
Sorry, I got out ahead of you there, but so is everybody clear on the motion then? That the memo be received, that staff bring forward a bylaw restricting the times as per the memo, Canada Day, Victoria Day, preceding and following both days, nothing about the retail sales, and that as part of the bylaw coming forward, that a process be included for special event permitting. Everybody clear with that? I'll call the question then. All in favor? That's passed. Does anybody want to have a discussion or move anything regarding the open air burning? And this is just in Lindsay. Go ahead, Councillor.
In order to do burning, don't you need a burn permit?
I'll turn it over to the fire chief. I don't think for small campfires that you do. I think for certain fires over a size you do, but I'll turn it over to the chief. Did you hear the question, Chief?
Yes, Mr. Mayor, you're correct. So no permit is required for campfires that are not larger than 24 inches in diameter or 60 centimeters in diameter.
So,
however, with that being said, it has to meet the setback provisions.
I guess my concern about it is that people have propane fire pits and fireplaces in their backyards. They also have, I guess, containers that you can buy where you can have a small fire. And are those within Lindsay? I understand it's within Lindsay, but are those going to be banned as well, or would they still be allowed?
Chief, did you hear the question? The question is propane. People have propane fireplaces in their backyard. Are they still allowed? And these little portable fireplaces people buy, which are really open air burning, they're just, you know, within store-bought container things, all sorts of new backyards now. Would those be permitted, or is it just, oh, I'll leave it at that.
Yep, no, it's another good question, Mr. Mayor. You know, we support the use of the actual gas-fired fireplaces. They don't create any, smoke emissions. They burn relatively clean and clear. They're permitted. No permit required for those appliances. The other kind of smaller, we'll call them a chimenea, that's kind of a brand name of those outdoor clay fireplaces. They do burn wood. And if they're not within the setbacks, they don't meet the burning requirements now, and you can't use them during a burn ban as well. But you can use the gas fire appliances during a burn ban.
So I guess the answer is if it's an appliance like propane or gas, you're still allowed to have them in your backyard. But under the proposed bylaw here, any kind of an open air campfire, whether it's in a store-bought or not, fire pit would not be allowed in the town of Lindsay.
That's correct.
Okay, answer your question? Councillor Riley?
Why just Lindsay? Why not other urban areas? Was there more complaints in Lindsay, Mark? I presume that was based on something.
Yes, through the mayor to council, the majority of our burning complaints, I shouldn't say the majority of them, but we are seeing more in the town of Lindsay, and with the intensification of building going on, and we do have a number of seniors that live in town. They're aging, and there's some health issues. We just seem to get more complaints about smoke in the built-up urban area of Lindsay compared to the other urban areas, as opposed to like Little Britain, Oakwood, Woodville, some of the other areas outside Fallon Falls and stuff like that. So, we're just bringing it to council because we have received the complaints, and we respond, and we ensure that people are burning in compliance with the bylaw if they are, or if they don't meet the setbacks, we kindly ask them to extinguish it. But we're just getting more and more of those types of calls. And as I said, council's getting those types of calls, and then they inquire with us, and so does the mayor's office. So as I said earlier, it's just we wanted to bring it forward to council for some discussion and get some further direction on it.
Thank you. Councillor Dunn?
Yeah, I don't know which councillors are getting those calls. I have had, I may average one a year, maybe, a bad year, might get two. So I'm not getting a lot of calls. So council's not getting calls.
I am.
Unless, well,
I do get them.
okay,
Yep.
all right, okay, so there we go. They don't have my phone number. Now, and the ones that I have got have been more around toxic waste. Like I've got a bunch of old copper and I'm burning off the skins on the copper, and it's black smoke coming out, and there's a couple of businesses in town that'll have a burn barrel. So that's the type I'm getting, as in opposed to we've got the family over for dinner, and we're sitting around our pool, and we've got our little steel container or the thing with the chimney, and we're gonna burn a couple logs of wood. I'm not getting those types of calls, and I'm certainly not getting them in great droves. I'm getting garbage complaints the odd time, and I understand that, but just very, very recently today, we're talking about having chickens in the backyard, and now we can't have, somebody can't have a Saturday night campfire. So I'm struggling with this. I really am. I haven't sensed a big problem here.
I was a little worried for a minute. I thought you were going to go there about why would I have chickens if I can't cook them over my fire? So I thought that's where you were going, but I'm glad you didn't. If there's no appetite for this, and I think the chief just brought it forward because we don't need to go around the horn. I think the chief brought it forward because he's had a few concerns. I have had a few calls, certainly not out of control by any means. I think there's some people that, smoke, goes into their neighbor's house, and of course the neighbors aren't happy about that. So I would just suggest right now, if it's not that big an issue, let's just leave that portion of it for now and not pursue it right now. Everybody's good with that, and we'll see how it plays out over the next little while, and we can almost bring it forward again. So, okay. All right, thanks, Chief. Appreciate it. I think we've got part of your memo we'll take forward to council as a recommendation, but I think we'll leave it at that for now, and thanks for bringing this forward.
Thank you.
Thank you. Have a good day. We have nothing from closed, and I need a motion to adjourn, please. Councillor Dunn and Elmsley, all in favor? That's passed. We are adjourned. Thanks, folks.